Hello everyone, I'm the Creep's Cabin. I know you use these videos to fall asleep. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I was driving back from a short weekend trip in the mountains. It was a solo trip, just something I needed to do to clear my head. Life back in the city was starting to feel too noisy, too cramped, and I needed a break from the mess. I had left early that morning, hoping to beat the Sunday traffic, but I took a wrong turn coming down from one of the less traveled forest roads. I wasn't too worried at first. I had fuel, I had a power bank for my phone, and I figured I'd just turn back around once I realized where I'd gone off course. But I didn't realize it quickly enough. I was at least 2 hours off my planned route before it hit me that I'd messed up bad. I'd been driving through dense pine woods, narrow gravel roads that barely had enough room for one car, and the GPS on my phone had been bouncing between no signal and a spinning wheel for the last 45 minutes. I wasn't panicked yet, but I could feel my nerves starting to rise. There was no one else around. No other cars, no signs of houses, no trail markers. Just endless trees and a sky that was starting to get orange at the edges. The road started to slope downward into a valley, and I thought maybe that would help with signal. I followed it, thinking maybe it would lead me out. But instead, it dead-ended near an old clearing that looked like it had once been used for logging or farming. The ground was flat, and there were a few crumbling wood posts sticking up out of the grass. Some rusted wire fencing curled around the base of one, almost swallowed by weeds and vines. I pulled over to check my phone again. Still no signal. I got out of the car, stretched my legs, and looked around. It was dead silent. No wind, no birds, nothing. I'd gotten used to the quiet during the trip, but this was different. This wasn't peaceful quiet. This felt like everything around me was holding its breath. I tried to retrace my route, but somehow, the turn I thought I took to get here wasn't where it should have been. Every path I tried led me in a circle or deeper into the trees. At some point, I gave up and decided to just camp in the car overnight and try again with fresh light. It wasn't ideal, but I had some snacks, a blanket, and enough fuel to keep warm if it got cold. By the time full darkness settled, I had backed my car into a corner of the clearing, facing out so I could drive straight if needed. I ate an energy bar, drank some water, reclined the seat, and tried to get comfortable. The crickets had started up again, which weirdly felt comforting. I dozed off sometime after midnight, but I didn't sleep long. I woke up to something tapping on the glass. It was faint, light, almost like a bug hitting the window, but it repeated, tap, 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 then silence, then again. I sat up, heart racing. The windshield was foggy from my breath, and the temperature dropped outside, but I could still see out through it. The forest edge was pitch black beyond the reach of my headlights. I listened. Nothing. Then I heard it again, this time on the passenger side. Tap, tap. I leaned over, squinting through the side window. Could have been a branch, maybe something brushing against the car in the breeze. I turned on the engine to kick on the lights. There was nothing there. I sat still for a moment, engine idling, headlights pointed into the trees. I didn't see anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. I turned off the engine again, not wanting to waste fuel. The tapping didn't come back for a while. I started to drift again, but I never really fell asleep. My ears were tuned to every creak and rustle outside. And then I heard movement, not the breeze through the trees. This was something stepping, crunching softly on gravel and dead pine needles. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I sat straight up, staring through the windshield. The sound was coming from the left side now, off in the trees just beyond the clearing. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear the spacing of the steps. It didn't sound like an animal. Not a deer, not a raccoon, and definitely not a bear. It sounded like someone walking in boots. One slow step after the other, like they weren't sure where to go. I turned the engine back on and locked the doors. My hands were slick on the steering wheel. I kept the lights on, scanning every part of the tree line in front of me. Then the sound stopped. Just like that. No more steps. I waited, leaning forward, eyes darting between the gaps in the trees. Suddenly, I saw movement. Just a flicker. Like someone stepping back behind a tree trunk. My stomach dropped. I threw the car in reverse, backed up a little, and then turned it around to face the road I came in on. I didn't care if it was the wrong road. I just needed to be moving, away from this place. The road twisted tightly, and I couldn't go too fast without risking hitting something or getting stuck. I drove with both hands on the wheel, eyes wide, trying to follow the path out. After about 10 minutes, I realized the road was sloping upward again. That was good, right? I'd driven downhill to reach the clearing. If I could just get back to the ridge, maybe I'd get signal. But then the road split, and there were no signs. Just two narrow paths, both covered in the same gravel and weeds. I chose the one to the right, thinking it looked a little more worn, like it had more tire marks. I followed it for another 15 minutes. No signal, no houses, nothing. Then I saw something up ahead. Another car. It was parked off to the side of the road, half hidden under the trees. Looked like a dark blue SUV, older model, maybe early 2000s. The windows were dusty. There were dead leaves all over the hood. It looked like it had been there for a while. I slowed down as I passed it, curious. Then I noticed the driver's door was open. Just hanging open like someone had gotten out and never closed it. I didn't stop. Something about it felt wrong. I kept going until the road ended at another dead end. This time it was more overgrown. There were a couple rusted barrels and an old shed that looked like it had collapsed under its own weight years ago. This didn't make sense. I had been driving straight. I should have been going uphill. Instead, I was boxed in again. I backed up, turned around, and tried the other fork in the road. But my headlights caught something near the edge of the trees as I turned. A shoe. Just one. A faded sneaker, lying on its side in the dirt. My chest tightened. I didn't stop. I didn't want to know who it had belonged to. I drove back to the fork and took the left path this time. I drove faster than before. Branches scraped the side of my car, but I didn't care. I just wanted out. After another long stretch, the forest opened up a little. I saw a wide patch of ground that had been cleared of trees. There were the remains of a small cabin, just a few walls and a roof, no doors, no windows, like it had burned or rotted away. In front of it, I saw what looked like a tent. A modern one, bright blue, like something from a camping store. It was collapsed, like someone had left it half set up and abandoned it. I drove past without stopping. Every inch of my body was screaming that this place wasn't right. I kept going until I saw a metal gate across the road. It was rusted, chained shut, with a small "No Trespassing" sign hanging crooked on it. Behind it, the road looked more solid, like it had been paved once. I parked the car and got out. I was done waiting. I grabbed my pack, climbed over the gate, and started walking. I walked for over an hour. The road wound down toward a small valley. I started seeing trash, beer cans, an old mattress, things people dump when they don't want to pay landfill fees. Then I saw a house. It was small, single-story, and looked lived in. There was a truck parked in front, and a porch light was on. I stayed in the trees, watching it for a while. I didn't see anyone come or go, but the truck was clean and looked like it had been used recently. I didn't want to risk knocking. I still didn't know where I was or who lived out here, but I got a bar of signal on my phone. One bar, blinking in and out. I texted my brother my location. I dropped a pin and typed, "Lost. Need help. Here." Then my signal vanished again. I waited. I didn't want to go back. I sat in the woods, just out of sight, and waited. Almost 2 hours later, I heard a car. A real one. A sedan, not a truck or an SUV. I stood up, heart racing, and moved toward the sound. It was my brother. He had gotten the text. I ran out onto the road. His headlights hit me, and he slammed the brakes. I waved and shouted. He jumped out, ran over, and hugged me hard. I didn't cry, but I could have. We didn't stay. I told him I'd explain later. He didn't ask anything. We got in and drove, back toward a real town, a gas station, and the rest of the world. Later, when I told him what had happened, he looked it up. The area I'd been lost in wasn't even on most maps anymore. Used to be a small logging town there in the 1950s. They'd pulled out after a landslide cut off access. People had squatted there on and off since. Strange reports, disappearances, a few old missing person cases, but no one had followed up. No one really went out that way anymore, and I never will again. I don't usually talk about this, mostly because it sounds too strange, even though nothing about it is impossible. It wasn't supernatural or unexplainable, just a series of things that happened in a place where no one could help. And I got out. That's what matters now. But I still remember every detail, every moment when I felt like something was wrong and couldn't put my finger on it until it was too late. It happened in northern Utah in early November, a few years ago. The air was dry and cold, the kind that cracks your lips within an hour if you don't use something on them. The days were short and the nights dropped well below freezing. I had decided to take a solo camping trip, something I'd done before in different parts of the West. I wasn't some expert survivalist, but I'd done enough weekend trips and had all the right gear. I had planned to hike into a patch of BLM land near a narrow canyon, the kind of area people sometimes overlook because it doesn't have big peaks or dramatic rock formations. Just a long stretch of juniper and pinyon pine, scrub brush, and rocky outcroppings. But it was quiet, open, and wild enough to be interesting. The kind of place where you can walk all day and not see a soul. That was exactly what I wanted. I parked my car at the mouth of a dirt road that had long since been blocked off by large rocks. There were no signs, no trail markers, just faint ATV tracks that faded as I got deeper into the hills. I'd looked at the satellite view beforehand, picked a spot that seemed flat enough to set up a tent, and close to a shallow wash where I could collect water with my filter. The area was far from any towns, maybe 60 miles from the nearest gas station, and didn't have cell service. That part never bothered me before. I liked being unreachable. I started walking mid-morning, wearing my pack, hiking poles, and a light jacket. The sun was out, but the wind cut through my clothes like knives if I stood still for too long. The terrain wasn't hard, gentle slopes, patches of loose rock, dry brush, the occasional prickly pear cactus. I made it to my planned campsite by mid-afternoon, around 2 p.m. The wash nearby was mostly dry, but had a few standing pools of muddy water trapped between smooth boulders. Enough for filtering, as long as I boiled it too. I set up my tent in a small clearing next to a dead juniper tree that had fallen long ago and been bleached by the sun. I unpacked, changed into warmer clothes, and started boiling water for dinner. I didn't realize I wasn't alone until just after sunset. It was that deep blue hour where everything turns colder by the second. The shadows stretch and blend into the rocks and trees. I had walked a short distance from my camp to collect more water from the wash when I saw it, a boot print. It was on the edge of the wash, maybe 10 feet from where I'd been earlier. It wasn't mine. I wear size 11 trail runners, and this print was clearly a boot, a heavier tread, smaller size, maybe a 9. The print looked fresh, pressed clearly into the soft, slightly damp mud near the edge of the standing water. There hadn't been any wind or animals around that would have distorted it. My stomach tightened. I looked around slowly, scanning the nearby trees, boulders, and the path I'd walked in on. Nothing. No sound, no movement, not even a rabbit or bird. I waited for maybe 2 minutes, completely still, just listening. My mind started coming up with explanations. Maybe someone else had hiked in, maybe they passed through earlier, and I didn't notice. But it was so quiet out here. If anyone else had been nearby, I would have heard their steps. And the boot print wasn't there earlier. I was sure of that. I'd knelt down to scoop water from the same pool, and hadn't seen any prints but my own. I filled my water bag quickly and walked back to camp, glancing over my shoulder the whole time. I told myself I was being paranoid. Still, I moved my tent a little farther from the wash, behind a group of boulders that gave me more cover. I left my cooking gear where it was but packed the rest of my stuff back into my pack and kept it inside the tent with me. I didn't start a fire. I just sat in the cold and ate my food quietly, scanning the shadows. That night was long. The wind picked up, howling through the narrow gullies and canyons around me. I kept waking up to every sound: the creak of a branch, the flutter of my tent wall, the snapping of something in the brush. I kept a small fixed-blade knife next to me inside the sleeping bag. Not that it would have done much if something bad really happened, but it made me feel less helpless. By morning, nothing had changed. No new prints, no signs of anyone or anything moving through. I waited until the sun had fully risen, packed up my gear, and decided to hike farther in. I didn't want to go back toward the trailhead yet, but I also didn't want to stay near the same spot. I figured if someone had passed through, they were probably heading in another direction. Or maybe it was just some old print I hadn't noticed. I told myself that enough times that I started to believe it. I walked another 5 or 6 miles into the hills, taking a more difficult route through some ridges and rocky plateaus to lose any potential trail. I didn't see anyone. No boot prints, no signs of campfires or gear. Just endless rock and brush. I found a new campsite in a narrow valley between 2 ridges. almost invisible unless you were directly above it. The wash here was bone dry, but I had enough water for a night. I made camp again, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. That night, just after I'd crawled into my sleeping bag, I heard the unmistakable sound of a rock hitting another rock. It echoed down the ridge to my left, followed by silence. It wasn't the kind of random sound wind makes. It was deliberate, sharp. I lay completely still, eyes wide open, listening for more. About 10 minutes passed before I heard it again, this time farther away, maybe on the other ridge. Like someone was throwing small rocks or testing their footing. The sound carried in the cold night air. I didn't sleep at all. When morning came, I made the decision to leave. I didn't even cook breakfast. I ate a granola bar while I packed and got moving as quickly as I could. I took a different route out, following the ridgeline for better visibility. My legs were tired, but adrenaline pushed me forward. The sun was high by the time I reached the area near where I'd camped the first night. I slowed down, scanning everything. The boot print near the wash had been washed out by a bit of rain overnight, but now, just 10 feet from where my tent had been, I saw something new. It was a pile of stones. Not natural. Stacked. Maybe 6 rocks, placed carefully into a cone shape. Someone had made it. I checked around. More prints. 2 sets now, both boots. One larger than the first. They walked in from the west and circled the area. Whoever it was had come through after I left and looked around where I'd been. Then they made that little marker. A cairn. I don't know if it was a signal, a message, or just some weird ritual, but it was fresh, and it wasn't there before. I didn't stay. I kept walking, fast, not running, but close to it. I had maybe 5 miles to get back to my car. I kept checking behind me. Every gust of wind made me jump. My mind was racing, playing through every possibility. Were they hunters? Some strange locals? People living off-grid who didn't want company? Meth cookers? Cartel guys? It could be anything, and none of those options felt safe. About halfway back to the trailhead, I crested a hill and stopped cold. Below me, in the shallow valley, was a man. He was crouched down near a yucca plant, not looking at me, but clearly doing something on the ground. He wore a thick jacket, old jeans, and boots. A pack sat beside him. I ducked down quickly and watched. He didn't move like a hiker. No trekking poles, no map, no water bottle in hand. He stayed crouched for a minute or so, then stood, looked around slowly, and picked up his bag. He walked off toward the west, away from the trailhead, moving quietly and with purpose, like he knew exactly where he was going. I waited until he was completely gone before I moved. I stayed low, following a different route down the hill and around the valley. I didn't want to risk being seen. My legs were shaking the whole time. When I finally reached the dirt road near the car, I felt like my lungs might burst. I practically ran the last 100 yards, yanked open the door, and threw my bag inside. I didn't even change out of my hiking boots or pack anything properly. I just started the engine and drove. I didn't look back. That night, in a cheap motel 2 towns over, I laid awake again, listening to normal sounds. Cars on the road, people in other rooms, the heater clicking on and off. I kept thinking about the boot prints, the stacked rocks, the man in the valley. None of it was supernatural. None of it was impossible. But the fear I felt out there was real. Primal. Like I was being watched, studied. I reported it anonymously to the BLM office. Just in case. Gave them the GPS coordinates. Told them what I saw. They didn't follow up. Probably nothing they could do. I haven't gone back since. I still hike, but not alone. Not out there. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I think about that pile of rocks. I wonder if it was just a coincidence. Maybe some harmless backpackers doing their own thing. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like someone was marking me, tracking me, waiting for me to come back. And I never will. Alright, here's the full-length, first-person realistic scary story based on your scenario. It's written with extensive detail, natural language, no supernatural elements, and a clear ending. I haven't thought about that house in a long time, probably because I've done everything I can to forget about that town altogether. I grew up in a small town in Kansas, the kind of place that doesn't even feel like it belongs to the world anymore. It's mostly forgotten land, surrounded by endless, flat fields, patches of woods that no one has any reason to walk into, and a lot of hollow-eyed people who never left. I got the hell out as soon as I could. But back when I was 16, I didn't know better. I still thought we were invincible. Me and my buddy, we thought we were untouchable. Nothing bad was ever really going to happen to us. Bad stuff happened on the news or in other states. Not in the middle of nowhere where nothing exciting ever happened. But one day something did. We had this habit of driving around back roads for no reason. Burned gas like it was free. We didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't party much because there wasn't much of a party scene unless you counted sitting in someone's backyard with a cooler full of warm beer and half the town's meth heads showing up uninvited. So we drove, sometimes for hours. Down roads we knew, down roads we didn't. That day it was hot. Summer was just starting to bite down. The kind of heat that makes your shirt stick to your back and the steering wheel too hot to touch without burning your fingers. We had the windows down because the AC in my old truck didn't work anymore. The air outside didn't help much. It just moved the heat around, swirling the smell of dust and dead grass through the cab. He was the one who spotted it. My buddy. A house, sitting maybe 100 feet back from the gravel road. We almost missed it. Trees and brush had grown up thick around it, like the woods were trying to swallow it. The roof sagged in the middle, and the paint had long since peeled away. The windows were shattered out, dark holes looking back at us like eyes. It didn't look like anyone had been there in years. We stopped, just sat there for a second, both of us looking at it. Something about it felt off, but we were bored and dumb. So we pulled the truck off to the side of the road and decided to check it out. Walking up to it, the grass was tall and dry, scratching at our legs. There were tire ruts leading up to the house, but they were old, faint, almost covered again by grass. I remember thinking, this place is totally dead. I was wrong. The front door was stuck, like really jammed in the frame. We tried pulling at it, jiggling the handle, pushing a little. No luck. I should have taken that as a sign to walk away. But we didn't. We ended up throwing our shoulders into it one at a time until it cracked loose and creaked open. The sound of it groaning open still plays in my head sometimes. The smell hit me first. Chemical. Sharp. Not like bleach or cleaning products. More like a mix of something burnt and something industrial. It was faint, but it stung when I breathed in just a little. My nose and the back of my throat itched. I tried breathing through my mouth, but it didn't help much. The air felt heavy in there. Hot, stale, and wrong. Inside, it looked like the house had been ripped apart by animals and then left to rot. Trash everywhere. Broken furniture. A busted TV on its side in one corner. There were stains on the floor. Black, brown, sticky looking. I didn't want to think about what they were. We walked through the living room, stepping over piles of clothes and broken glass. There was a coffee table with a bunch of empty cold medicine boxes on it, and soda bottles that had cloudy, yellow liquid in them. At the time, I didn't really register what it meant. I mean, I knew people cooked meth around our area. Half the town seemed to be on it, but I'd never actually seen any of it firsthand. I thought maybe it was just junk. We figured no one was there. At some point, we came across this doorway with a weird setup. There was a rusty metal can, like an old paint can, sitting just inside the room. It was filled with rocks, and there was a thin string tied from one side of the doorframe to the other, just above ankle height. The string cut right across the opening. We didn't touch it, just stepped over it and moved on. We were curious, not reckless. At least not that reckless. The floor creaked under us as we moved. Every step echoed. I remember hearing a drip somewhere, like water tapping on metal, steady and slow. There wasn't any power in the place. The light that came in through the shattered windows was yellow and harsh, dust swirling in the beams like tiny insects. We decided to go upstairs. The staircase was a mess. Glass shards were all over it, crunching under our shoes as we climbed. The railing was half broken off, hanging by a few screws. The walls were dirty, scratched. Some places had writing on them. Mostly names, curse words, drawings that didn't make much sense. The moment we reached the top of the stairs, everything changed. We stepped into the upstairs hallway, and there he was. A man. Thin. Dirty. His skin looked like it had been pulled tight over his bones. He had no shirt on, just dirty jeans, and his arms were covered in scabs and bruises. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, locked right on us like he couldn't believe we were real. He was shaking. His whole body jittered like he was trying to vibrate out of his own skin. And he had a gun in his hand. A handgun, small, probably a .22 or something close. I didn't know guns that well then, but I knew enough to know it didn't matter what kind of gun it was. It was pointed at us. I froze. He didn't say anything that made sense. Just started yelling. Words came out fast and broken, loud but slurred, like they were tripping over each other. He sounded terrified. He screamed like he thought we were demons or cops, or maybe both. His hand was shaking so hard, the barrel of the gun was swinging side to side. For 1 second, I remember thinking we're going to die, just like that. 2 dumb kids getting shot in a rotting house in the middle of nowhere. Our parents would find out about it on the news. Or maybe they'd never find out. Maybe we'd just vanish, and someone would find our bones years later under a pile of garbage. Then instinct kicked in. We ran. I didn't think. I didn't look back. I heard him yell again, louder this time, more angry, but I didn't hear a shot. Just our feet thundering down the stairs, crunching glass, slamming into each other, slipping on something at the bottom, nearly falling over each other as we clawed at the door. It had slammed shut again somehow. We hit it with our shoulders, cracked it open, and burst out into the sunlight like rats escaping a trap. I don't even remember running back to the truck. I just remember starting it, dust flying behind the tires as we peeled out, the engine roaring like it had life of its own. We didn't talk. Not for a while. Just sat there, both of us breathing hard, hearts pounding in our ears, staring at the road in front of us. I kept checking the rear view, half expecting to see that guy running after us. But he never came. When we finally spoke, it was short. We both knew what we had walked into. A meth lab. A real one. Not some scene from a movie. The house might have been mostly dead, but it wasn't abandoned. Not completely. Someone was still living in there, cooking God knows what, probably on the edge of his sanity from breathing in those chemicals and living in that filth. Looking back, that string across the door, that can of rocks, it was a tripwire. I didn't realize it then, but I know now. If we had tripped it, maybe it would have made a noise to alert someone. Or worse, maybe it was attached to something more dangerous. Who knows? That guy might have booby-trapped the house thinking cops would come, or other junkies trying to steal his stuff. We were lucky. So damn lucky. I drove past that place a couple years later. It was gone, leveled to the foundation. Nothing left but a patch of dirt and weeds growing wild over it. I didn't stop. Just kept driving, pretending I didn't know what used to stand there. I don't talk about it much. Most people wouldn't believe it anyway, or they'd just roll their eyes and say we were idiots. And they'd be right. We were. But we were also just bored kids in a dying town looking for something to make us feel alive. We found it, and it nearly got us killed. That's the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. Not ghosts, not monsters, just a real person, real drugs, and a real gun. And the dumb luck of walking away without a bullet in our backs. It started on a weekend. I wasn't even planning to do anything. My cousin had called me out of nowhere Friday night, saying he had access to a small piece of land out in the countryside. It wasn't too far from the city, maybe 2 hours of driving, depending on traffic. He told me it used to be an old private hunting property that someone had abandoned years ago. One of his friends knew the current owner and had arranged for us to stay there for free. He wanted to go just to get away, maybe shoot some videos for his channel, cook over a fire, and sleep under the stars. No houses, no electricity, no signal. Just pure, empty land. I didn't have anything better to do, so I packed up a backpack with some clothes, a flashlight, my sleeping bag, and a few essentials. We stopped at a store on the way to pick up snacks and water, and we drove out early Saturday morning. The drive was mostly quiet, winding through roads that slowly turned from pavement to gravel to dirt. We saw fewer houses, fewer signs, until eventually it was just trees and shrubs on either side. He had a GPS marker from his friend, and we followed that as far as the car could go. When we couldn't drive any farther, we got out, slung our bags over our shoulders, and hiked the last stretch in on foot. The place was quiet, almost too quiet. You don't realize how much background noise cities make until you're far enough away from them. No distant hum of traffic, no sirens, not even birds at first. Just wind in the trees and the sound of your own steps. Eventually, we found a flat clearing surrounded by trees and decided that would be our spot. My cousin said there used to be a hunting shack deeper in the woods, but it was broken down and full of bugs and spiderwebs. We didn't bother going to look at it. We set up camp, pitched 2 small tents, built a fire ring out of rocks, and gathered some deadwood. The weather was nice, not too hot, not too cold. The air felt fresh. We cooked instant noodles over the fire that night and sat back watching the stars. It was peaceful. We both even joked about how silent the place was. No traffic, no barking dogs, no shouting neighbors. Just the sound of wind and an occasional owl. It was sometime around 11 p.m. when things started to feel different. I had gone to pee in the woods, maybe 20 feet from our camp. I left the small light from my headlamp on and faced a tree. As I stood there, I suddenly felt this strange sensation, like someone was standing just out of view. You know how you can feel eyes on you? That kind of thing. I froze. I didn't hear anything, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I turned my head slowly, scanning behind me. Nothing. Just darkness and trees. Still, I hurried back to the fire without saying anything. My cousin had already crawled into his tent. I sat there by the fire for a bit longer. I kept glancing into the woods. I told myself it was just me overthinking, being a city guy in the middle of nowhere. The fire was starting to die, so I tossed on a couple more sticks and decided I should sleep too. The woods weren't silent anymore. As I crawled into my tent and zipped it closed, I could hear this faint crackling sound. Not fire, not wind, something else, like sticks snapping slowly one at a time. I laid still in my sleeping bag, trying to hold my breath and listen. It was faint, and it stopped for a while. Then I heard it again. Not constant, just one crunch here, then silence. Then again, always in a different spot. I told myself it was animals. A raccoon maybe, or a deer. But the movements weren't natural. They didn't seem like a creature walking calmly. It was more like someone trying to be quiet, but stepping on twigs now and then. I laid there for what felt like an hour. I eventually fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning, everything seemed normal. Birds were chirping. The fire pit was cold. My cousin was already awake, stretching outside his tent. I asked if he heard anything weird last night. He said no. I let it go. We made breakfast and hiked around the area. Took some photos. Threw rocks into a small stream we found. Everything was calm again. We explored a bit deeper into the woods and eventually came across an old fence made of rotting wood. It was broken down in several spots. Behind it was a wide, open section of dead grass with tree stumps poking out here and there. It looked like it used to be cleared land, maybe where hunters set up tree stands. It had long been taken over by weeds. There was a weird feeling there, though. Even in broad daylight, it didn't feel right. Something about how quiet it was. Even the birds seemed to avoid that part. I didn't mention it, but I was glad when my cousin said we should head back to camp. That night, we stayed up later. The stars were even clearer. We made some tea and ate chips, sitting close to the fire. Around midnight, we both started to get tired. He went into his tent first. I stayed up just a little longer, tossing a stick into the fire now and then. Then I heard it again. Crunch. I froze. The same sound from the night before. A stick breaking somewhere in the woods. I turned my headlamp on and pointed it toward the sound. Nothing. Just trees and shrubs. Crunch. This time to the left. I pointed the light there. Still nothing. I stood up slowly, now fully alert. I held the flashlight steady, trying to see past the first row of trees. My heart started to beat faster. The fire crackled behind me, and I could feel the heat on my back. Then I saw it. A shape. Just for a second. Tall, not wide. Upright. Too tall to be a deer. It moved between two trees, just a flash of motion in the darkness. I couldn't see a face or clothes or even skin. Just a movement. I called out to my cousin, but there was no answer. I wanted to run to his tent, but I didn't want to turn my back to the woods. I kept the flashlight steady and slowly stepped backward until I was at my cousin's tent. I knocked on it hard until he finally unzipped it and looked up at me, groggy and confused. I told him something was moving out there. He thought I was joking at first, but when I kept my voice low and serious, he stepped out and joined me by the fire. We stood there for 10 minutes, scanning the woods, but saw nothing. Eventually, he got annoyed, said it was probably just a deer, and went back to bed. I didn't. I stayed up the whole night by the fire. I didn't hear any more footsteps, but I never fully relaxed. When the sun finally rose, I felt like I had been awake for days. I packed up my gear and told my cousin I was heading back early. He didn't argue. I think he saw something in my face. I told him I'd wait by the car. He said he wanted to look around one last time, maybe fly his drone before leaving. He told me to go ahead. I hiked back alone, sticking to the same trail we came in on. I didn't hear anything this time. Just my own boots on the dirt, birds chirping, branches swaying. It wasn't until I got back to the car and waited for over an hour that I started to worry. I tried calling his phone, but there was no signal. I paced around, checking the trail to see if he was coming. Nothing. Another hour passed. I started to panic. I wanted to go back, but I didn't know the way as well as he did. And the thought of going back into those trees alone made my stomach twist. Eventually, I saw him walking down the trail. He was pale, sweating, and walking fast. No gear, no drone. When he got to the car, he didn't say anything. He just opened the door and sat down. I asked if he was okay. He nodded, but his hands were shaking. We didn't talk the whole drive back. Later that night, he texted me one sentence. Something followed me. I tried calling him, but he didn't pick up. I haven't seen him since. He won't respond to texts, won't answer calls. His social media went dark. I think about that weekend all the time. I go over every sound, every step. I try to convince myself it was just animals, just nerves, just an unfamiliar place. But then I remember the shape I saw, the way it moved, the way it was just watching, and the way my cousin came back without any of his stuff. I don't go camping anymore, and I never will again. Stephen had just turned 30, and we wanted to make sure it was a birthday he wouldn't forget. We planned the party for 2 weeks, nothing fancy, just a solid group of people, enough booze to drown a horse, a cake I baked myself, and balloons that Stephen insisted on even though he acted like he didn't care about turning 30. We smoked a little weed, blasted music, played drinking games, and let the night unravel however it wanted to. I remember it being one of those parties where everything felt a little warm and blurry, not because I was too drunk, but because the atmosphere was just so good. People were laughing. There was loud music and bodies moving through the living room, bouncing from conversation to conversation, from joint to bottle, from dance floor to the couch. It was one of those nights that felt endless until it wasn't. It started winding down when one of Stephen's friends said he'd give Stephen $100 if he came with him to the casino to gamble it. Just like that, Stephen was hyped. I remember him grabbing his shoes like it was the most exciting idea he'd ever heard. A few other people decided to tag along. Then more people started making their way out the door. In a matter of maybe 20 minutes, the apartment emptied. Just like that, I was alone. I didn't mind. I was pretty used to the quiet. After everyone left, I did a lazy cleanup. I tossed half-full cups in the sink, picked up crumpled napkins, turned the music off, and then went around switching off all the lights except the one in my room. The living room still smelled like weed and sweat and sugar from the cake. The kind of smell that sticks in the air long after the last person leaves. Eventually, I got into my night clothes, loose shorts and a shirt, and sat on the edge of my bed. I turned on the TV, something mindless to fill the silence. Probably one of those shows I don't even pay attention to, just enough noise to not feel completely alone. I was sitting there, not really watching, when I started to hear a sound. At first, I didn't think anything of it, just a dragging sound. Slow, light. Then about 15 seconds later, a soft plop. It was faint, but in the quiet, it stood out. I paused the TV. The dragging came again, same rhythm. Drag, then a few beats later, plop. It went on like that, consistent but far off. I figured maybe something with the fish tank was going wrong in the living room. We had a medium-sized tank by the window. One of the filters had been making weird sounds for a while now. I made a mental note to check on it, but stayed where I was, figuring it wasn't urgent. But the sound didn't stop. It went on for maybe another 20 or 30 minutes. Drag, plop. Drag, plop. I told myself it was the balloon strings shifting from the AC draft, or maybe the tank filter backfiring. I thought about getting up to check, but kept putting it off. It didn't sound threatening, just weird. Then, in the middle of all this background noise, something moved. I caught it out of the corner of my eye, just a subtle shift by the hallway, something that wasn't there before. I turned my head and stared. Right there at the threshold of my door was a balloon, one of the big metallic ones we used for decoration. Silver, shiny, and shaped like the number 0. I just stared at it. I hadn't noticed it before. I was sure I had seen all the balloons still tied up in the living room or just floating against the ceiling. This one was different. It was low to the ground, the weight on the string dragging behind it. I stared at it for a solid 30 seconds, not moving, just trying to figure out how it got there. No windows were open. The AC was off. There wasn't any airflow strong enough to move a balloon through a hallway, let alone into my room. Then it moved. I don't mean it bobbed in place. I mean it moved. It slid forward. The plastic base dragged across the carpet with that soft scraping sound I'd been hearing. It moved maybe half a foot forward, paused, floated up about 6 inches, then drifted forward again. Then the weight at the end of the ribbon dropped back to the carpet with a soft thud. It just sat there again. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just watched, stunned, as the balloon repeated this exact movement. Slow drag, lift, drift, drop. Every couple of minutes, it inched closer to my bed. I looked around my room, searching for anything that could explain it. A draft? A vent. But the air was still. The door hadn't been opened. The windows were shut. The ceiling fan was off. The balloon was deliberate. It was controlled. Minute by minute, it crept forward. It would sit still for a while, then do its slow shuffle again. By this point, my skin was crawling. My body was stiff. Something about this didn't sit right. It wasn't the balloon itself. It was how it moved. It wasn't random. It wasn't chaotic like wind. It was slow, focused. Eventually, it made it all the way to my bed. I hadn't moved. I couldn't. I watched this thing for almost an hour. Now it was right at the edge, the ribbon and weight brushing against the bed skirt. I stared down at it, waiting. Then it lifted, floated just enough so that the curve of the number 0 was eye level with me, and tilted slightly forward. It leaned into my face. I didn't scream, but my whole body reacted. I shot up off the bed, heart pounding, adrenaline kicking in hard. I backed up all the way to the wall, breathing fast, staring at this damn balloon like it was alive. I tried to process it, to force logic into what I just witnessed. I told myself maybe air trapped in the balloon was shifting, maybe static electricity or changes in temperature were moving it. But that didn't explain it. I waited there, leaning against the wall, staring at this object like it might start moving again. But it didn't. Not after that. It just stayed there, tilted slightly forward, as if it had made its move and was now satisfied with getting right up in my face. Eventually, I walked around it. Slowly. I didn't touch it. I didn't want to. I walked out of my room, into the kitchen, and stood there for a while just trying to calm myself down. I poured myself some water. My hand was shaking. Then I turned on every single light in the apartment. Every room. Kitchen, hallway, bathroom, even the porch light. I wasn't about to sit in the dark. Not after that. I walked around, checking every window and door to make sure they were still closed. They were. The air was still. The other balloons hadn't moved. It was just that one. I walked back to my room eventually, peeking in like a kid afraid of monsters. It was still there, still leaning against the bed. I didn't sleep in my bed that night. I closed my bedroom door, turned on the TV in the living room, and slept on the couch. I told myself it was just physics. Something about how the balloon was made, the weight distribution, how it interacted with the air. Maybe residual heat from the party, or a slow leak in the balloon causing shifts in buoyancy. I searched every possible explanation. The next morning, I woke up early. I didn't feel rested. I didn't feel right. The apartment was quiet. Light was pouring through the blinds. I walked back into my room and found the balloon exactly where I'd left it. Still, harmless looking. I picked it up, finally. The string was untied. It had clearly come loose from whatever it had been anchored to. I walked it back to the living room, tied it around the back of a chair, and tried to forget about the whole thing. When Stephen came back later that afternoon, I didn't even bring it up. I didn't want to hear him laugh or tell me I was just high. I wasn't. I was the most sober I'd been all night when it happened. For the next few days, I kept an eye on that balloon. It never moved again. Eventually, it lost its lift and sagged, then drooped down until it just hung from the chair like a used-up party favor. But I never forgot how it moved that night, how it dragged itself through the hallway, slow and steady, how it made it all the way to my bed and leaned in like it had something to say. I still don't have a clean explanation. I tell myself it was just coincidence, a strange mix of air currents and timing, that I was tired, maybe a little paranoid from the weed. But deep down, I know what I saw. I know how it moved. And even now, long after the party's over and the apartment is quiet again, I still feel uneasy when I see helium balloons. I don't trust them. Not after that night. When I was a kid, I had an imaginary friend named Jesse. I don't remember much about him now, just little flickers of things. I remember sitting in my room, on the carpet, pushing toy cars along the floor, and feeling like someone was there with me. Not in a scary way, just present. I used to talk to him a lot, according to my parents. I think I remember giving him one of my toy trucks once. But honestly, I thought it was all just the usual stuff kids do. You imagine someone to play with when you're alone, and you grow out of it. I never thought twice about it growing up. But then a couple of years ago, I visited some relatives in Ireland. My family has deep roots there, and every time we go, we end up sitting around a fire or a kitchen table with tea, telling old stories. A lot of them are weird or unsettling, mostly things that happen to distant relatives. People waking up in places they didn't fall asleep, lights in the woods, weird noises at night. That kind of thing. I never took it too seriously. But that night, the stories were getting darker, more personal. My aunt told a story about something she saw on a farm road once, something she wouldn't explain properly. And then my mom brought up Jesse. She said it casually, like it was just another odd thing from the past. She said, "Remember when you had that imaginary friend, Jesse?" I blinked. The name felt familiar, but distant, like a word in a language I hadn't spoken in years. I said I kind of remembered, but I thought it was just a game I played with myself. Then she started filling in the blanks. She said she never understood why I called him Jesse. It wasn't a name I'd heard before, apparently. No one in the family had that name, and none of her friends did either. We didn't know any Jessies. She said it was strange because I was barely talking at the time, just a few words here and there, and yet I said his name very clearly. Jesse. Then she told me about this time when my dad was getting ready for work. He was an electrician back then, working in a mine not far from where we lived. I was about 2 or 3. She said one morning, just before he left, I asked him to bring back some coal for Jesse's gran. Not for us, not for a toy, for Jesse's gran. She said I was really specific about it, and serious, like it was important. My dad kind of laughed it off and said okay, but both of them thought it was strange. What really got me was what she said next. We were on a day trip when I was little, to a place we went to a lot when I was very young. I don't remember the trip itself, but she said we were walking near a hill with an old graveyard at the bottom of it. Just a small one, not like a big cemetery. She said I suddenly took off running. I was barely out of a stroller at the time, but I bolted. She and my dad ran after me, thinking I was just being a typical toddler. But I didn't run randomly. I went straight through the gates of that graveyard, past rows of headstones, and stopped in front of a small grave. She said I stood there for a long time, just staring at it. I wasn't talking, I wasn't playing, just staring. And the name on the stone was Jesse. She said they didn't know what to do, so they just watched. After a while, I turned around and walked back to them without a word. I didn't talk about it, didn't explain. And the weirdest thing is, we never went back to that place again. That story stuck with me long after that night ended. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I told myself there had to be some explanation. Maybe I heard the name somewhere and just remembered it. Maybe I saw the grave before and it stuck in my mind somehow. But it didn't feel like that. It felt different. I felt like I'd forgotten something that was once important to me. When I got back home, I started going through old photo albums. I was looking for pictures from that time, hoping maybe I'd see something that would jog my memory. There were a few photos of me playing alone in the living room, a few at the park. Nothing weird. But then I found one where I was sitting on the floor in my room, with a second juice box next to me. No one else in the picture. Just me. But the second juice box was there, opened, like someone had been drinking from it. I asked my mom about it, and she said she used to give me 2 sometimes because I insisted. One for me, one for Jesse. I found myself thinking about the grave. I wanted to know more. Where it was, who he was, if there were any records. I texted my mom about it, and she gave me the name of the place. It was a tiny village not far from where some of our distant cousins still lived. I ended up messaging one of them, asking if the graveyard was still there. They said it was. I don't know why I felt so compelled, but I booked a flight. I told myself it was just a coincidence, a story that got blown out of proportion over time. But I had this strange urge to go, to see the grave again, even if I didn't remember it. Something about it wouldn't let go of me. The village was small, barely more than a collection of houses and a single shop. I stayed at a little bed and breakfast run by an older couple who were friendly but quiet. They told me the graveyard was still there, down the old path near the church. I walked there the next morning. The sky was gray, and the grass was wet from the rain the night before. Everything smelled like soil and moss. The graveyard was just as small as I imagined. Maybe 20 graves, all old. Some were so weathered the names were barely readable. I walked slowly, checking each one. Then I saw it. A small stone, sunken slightly into the earth. The name on it was Jesse Murphy. No date of birth, just a date of death, 1921. Age 7. I stood there for a long time. I don't know what I was expecting to feel, but I didn't feel fear. I felt strange, like standing in a place I'd once known well, but hadn't visited in years. I noticed that the stone had a small chip in one corner. For some reason, I reached out and touched it. The stone was cold and rough. I tried to find more information. I checked local records, asked the caretaker of the church nearby, even looked in some old newspaper archives. Jesse Murphy had died of scarlet fever, one of several children who died in the area that year. His family had lived nearby. His grandmother had lived alone in a cottage not far from the village. According to a faded record in a library ledger, she used to heat her home with coal. I left Ireland feeling unsettled. Not scared, exactly, but heavy. Like I was carrying something back with me that I didn't pick up on purpose. For weeks after that, I found myself waking up in the middle of the night and staring at the dark corners of my room. Not because I thought I saw something, but because I felt like something was missing. Like I'd forgotten to bring someone back with me. I stopped talking about Jesse after that. I didn't tell many people what I found, not because I was afraid they wouldn't believe me, but because I wasn't sure what I believed myself. It didn't feel like a ghost story. It felt like a gap in time had opened up, just for a little while, and I had stepped into someone else's life without meaning to. And maybe, just maybe, someone had stepped into mine. I think about Jesse sometimes, not like a child remembering a game, but like someone thinking about an old friend they lost touch with. I don't remember what his voice sounded like. I don't remember his face, but I remember the feeling of not being alone, of sitting on the floor of my room with the sense that someone was beside me, even if I couldn't see him. Was he real? I don't know. Maybe I was just a lonely kid who made up a friend and stumbled into a coincidence years later. Or maybe memory works in ways we don't fully understand. Maybe there are pieces of us that reach backward or forward, touching lives we don't remember living. Maybe some friendships don't end, even when one of you forgets they ever began. All I know is that I'll never hear the name Jesse the same way again. And sometimes, when I see a second juice box sitting somewhere, unopened, I still feel like I'm not entirely alone. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, my family decided to take a summer vacation up to a small island in Maine. My memory of that time is cloudy in places, like watching an old tape that flickers and skips, but some moments are crystal clear. The kind that stay with you no matter how old you get. We had rented an old house on the edge of the island, right on the water. You could hear the waves lapping at the rocks if the wind came in the right direction. It should have been peaceful. Maybe it was for someone else. But for me, that trip never stopped being strange. The island itself was small, maybe a couple dozen acres at most, and only accessible by ferry. There were only 6 or 7 other houses scattered around it, and every one of them looked like it had been there for a century. Peeling paint, sagging porches, windows that looked like they hadn't been cleaned in decades. The people who lived there were mostly old. Not just retired, but old. Most had white or silver hair, bent backs, thin wrists, voices that never rose above a murmur. All of them seemed to move in slow motion, like they were being cautious not to disturb something they knew was always watching. Except for one man named Bubba. Mid-40s, big hands, strong back, always in boots and overalls even in the summer heat. He fished for a living, hauling in bluefish from the bay and gutting them on a makeshift table behind his weather-worn shack. He looked out of place among the elders, but nobody ever really explained how he ended up there. He mostly kept to himself. I only remember him because his name was Bubba, and, even as a kid, I found that funny. The house we stayed in looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Every part of it smelled like old wood and musty books. The floors creaked with every step. The furniture was stiff and heavy, like it was carved out of tree trunks. There was no television, which bothered me more than it should have. The water came from a well pump in the kitchen that groaned every time we used it. The pantry had shelves lined with glass jars filled with things I didn't recognize. pickled vegetables, dried roots, dark liquids. What stuck with me most was the books. Hundreds of them. They were everywhere. On shelves, stacked on tables, even in the bedrooms. Most were brittle and yellowed, their covers falling apart. Some were handwritten journals with dates going back over 100 years. There were also framed photographs hanging on the walls. Black and white portraits of children in uniforms, old teachers with stern faces, large groups of kids posed stiffly in front of the same building we were now sleeping in. I didn't pay much attention to them at first. At night, the backyard came alive with rats. Not mice. Rats. Big ones. Dozens of them. They'd scurry around the yard, darting in and out of the weeds, rustling through old sheds and piles of driftwood. You could hear them bumping into things, squeaking to each other. My parents tried to keep me away from the windows once it got dark, but I saw them more than once. I remember thinking they weren't afraid of people. That was the strange part. They didn't run away when the lights came on. They just stared. And then there were the neighbors, the old women from the other houses. Every time we made dinner, they'd show up. Not all at once. Usually one or two at a time. They'd knock on the door holding blueberry pie, jars of jam, or a platter of fresh bluefish. They always knew. We never told them. There was no way they could have seen us. The kitchen didn't face the road. But somehow, they knew when the food hit the table. They'd smile, say almost nothing, hand over the food, and walk back down the road slowly. Always slowly. I didn't like it. I didn't like how quiet they were, or how they always seemed to be watching, even if you didn't see them. A few nights into the trip, my parents began hearing singing. At first it was faint. They said it would start and stop, maybe 20 or 30 minutes at a time. It wasn't every night, maybe every other. The first couple times, they assumed someone on the island had a radio or maybe an old record player. But the songs were always the same. Simple tunes. Melodies that sounded like lullabies. The kind of songs you imagine kids singing in a classroom long ago. They asked around. Nobody admitted to hearing anything. Bubba shrugged it off. The old women just smiled in that tight-lipped way they had. After that, my parents stopped asking. Then came the second to last night. I remember it more clearly than anything else. We had just finished dinner. It was warm out, a thick kind of humid that made your shirt stick to your back. My dad opened some windows to let air in. That's when we heard it. All of us. My parents, my sister, me. It wasn't faint this time. It was loud enough to feel like it was inside the house. Dozens of voices. High-pitched. Soft. All singing the same slow song. No instruments. No rhythm. Just voices. Like a children's choir, but with no joy in it. No life. We stood in the living room, frozen. My dad stepped outside. My mom followed. I stayed at the screen door, just behind them. The air was completely still. No wind. No animals. Just the sound of kids singing. But there were no kids on the island. None. Only old people. I knew that. Everyone knew that. We couldn't tell where it was coming from. It echoed in a weird way, bouncing off the water, the trees, the houses. It sounded like it came from everywhere and nowhere. We walked down the road a bit, but there was nothing. No lights. No movement. Just that slow, steady singing. Then, just like that, it stopped. The silence afterward felt heavier than the song, like the island was holding its breath. The next day, my dad spent most of the morning in the house's little library. He said he just wanted to look through some of the books and maybe figure out how old the house really was. I didn't think much of it until he called my mom in, and they started whispering in the next room. I snuck in when they weren't looking. The book was a large scrapbook, dusty and fragile. The cover had peeled away in places. Inside were newspaper clippings, old photos, handwritten notes. Pages and pages about a school that used to be on the island. Our house. Back in the early 1900s, it was the only school on the island. There were pictures of the students, teachers, school plays, newspaper articles. One page in particular had a full photo of a boys' choir. Maybe 20 kids, all in matching uniforms, standing on the front steps of the building. The same steps that now led to our porch. The faces were blurry, the kind of blur that came from a bad camera and too much age. But the expressions, those I remember. None of them smiled. I remember my mom covering her mouth and turning away. My dad just stared. The caption under the photo said, "Spring Choir Recital, 1923. We left the next day. Packed up early. Caught the first ferry off the island. I don't remember us saying goodbye to anyone. I don't remember seeing any of the old women or even Bubba. It was like the island emptied out the night before. That trip stuck with me. For years. I've never gone back. Never asked to. My parents don't talk about it. Not even when I brought it up later. They act like it never happened, or like it wasn't a big deal. But I know what I heard. I know what we all heard. I know what we saw in that book. And I still wonder about that singing. Not what caused it, but why it stopped. I remember the story as Dad told it. Even now, it sends chills through me. Memory alone is enough to make my skin crawl. He was around 12 at the time, and his cousin, whom I'll call Jay, was about 8. Dad's aunt had driven down from Louisville that weekend and brought Jay along to stay with the family. Everything seemed normal at first, just a weekend visit. But from the very start there was something odd in the air. When Jay arrived, Dad remembers him being pale and quiet. That night, Jay told Dad he'd had a terrible dream. He was in a coffin and couldn't get out. He said it softly, the sort of voice small children use, uncertain and afraid. Dad, trying to calm him, told him not to be silly. He assured him everything was fine, adults told him. But Jay didn't smile or shake it off. He just looked down at the floor, uncertain. The next morning, Grandpa and Dad were going to the feed mill to pick up a load of grain from a tractor trailer. Jay said he wanted to come along. No one in the family objected. The morning was cool but bright. Grandpa's old Ford pickup was polished and blue, engine purring. Jay climbed in beside Dad in the bench seat. Grandpa started the engine, shifted it into drive, and they rolled off down the country road. They passed the small church graveyard on the edge of town. Dad remembers the gravestones leaning over the fence, some old, others new. Jay broke the silence with a question. Grandpa, if I were in a coffin, would they bury me in that graveyard? Grandpa laughed and said maybe one day, but a long time from now. Don't worry. Dad felt uneasy hearing it, but he laughed too. Kids say strange things, he thought. They reached the feed mill, roaring with machinery and the smell of grain and oil. Workers in overalls loaded the truck. Dad watched Jay hop down, wander near piles of oats and corn, kicking at chaff. It was louder than usual, but calm. They finished, climbed back into the truck, and drove back home. Jay seemed more quiet now, quieter than before, almost withdrawn. That Sunday morning came with bright light through the windows, hymns drifting through the house. Everyone got dressed, put on their Sunday best. In the car on the way to church, Dad remembers Jay clutching his mother's hand tightly, as if seeking future reassurance or comfort. Jay didn't speak much, just stared out the window at stone fences, fields stretching out, and occasional farmhouses. At Sunday school, the kids were together. The teacher welcomed them in gentle tones. Eventually, she asked, "Does anyone want to tell us what it's like to be with Jesus?" Jay raised his hand. The classroom quieted, and Jay spoke softly. "I want to know what it feels like." The teacher started to carry on with the lesson plan, reading passages. But Jay's voice cracked. He began to cry quietly, tears running down his cheeks. He said, "I really need to know." It wasn't whining or fussing. It was something different, more urgent, deeper. The teacher paused and gently shifted. She began describing what heaven might be like: light, peace, reunion. Jay listened, wiping tears, staring at the cross on the wall behind her. Later, after service and lunch at the church fellowship hall, some families lingered. Jay played lightly with other children, laughter echoing. Dad and Grandpa talked in low voices about the miracle stories. They laughed softly, but Dad noticed Jay's smile was gone. He looked tired, as though something inside had shifted. Then came the tragic moment. Jay crossed the road from the church parking lot, heading to the car with his aunt. A car came unexpectedly from around a corner. The driver didn't see the child. It happened too fast. Dad and Grandpa both saw it, rush in horror. Jay collapsed. By the time someone reached him, it was clear he wouldn't survive. They tried, but he was gone. Just like that. It wasn't ghosts or fairy tales. No monsters hiding under the beds. It was real life, unpredictable and awful. Dad says Jay seemed to know. That dream the night before. The question at the graveyard. The longing in Sunday school. So many small signs. Jay wasn't morbid or wanting attention. He was a child caught between dreams and reality, maybe sensing something he couldn't name. Dad says the way Jay asked, quiet but unwavering, "I want to know what it's like to be with Jesus." It felt like he was saying goodbye. In the days after, the family gathered. The house was full of cousins, aunts, uncles, voices hushed. Dad remembers staring at Jay's empty bed, the quilt folded perfectly. His aunt sat quietly staring at the window. Jay's mother wept in soft sobs. Grandpa's shoulders shook with grief. But everywhere, people spoke in low tones. About souls, about how a child who asked to know heaven might have slipped through the veil early, before pain. Dad now tells me it gives him the shivers. Because when he laid eyes on Jay, there was a light in them during Sunday school, as though he'd already glimpsed something no adult sees. And the dream, and the question in the graveyard. They weren't toys or random words. They were warnings or farewells. He says he doesn't feel haunted. He doesn't believe in ghosts or supernatural hauntings. But it leaves a cold knot in his chest whenever he thinks. A child asked what heaven was like, and hours later, he was taken. In my own days, I see fields and country churches, and I think of Jay. I imagine that day, bright, peaceful, silent messages, but the ending was sudden. No fantasy. Just one innocent life ended too soon. Dad and Grandpa still mention it sometimes, each time in soft tones, voice-catching. They speak as if still hoping to understand. And for them it's more than grief. It's the memory of a boy who seemed to know his time was short, but braved it with simple words. I want to know. There's no ghost at the graveyard, no whispering voices at night. Just the memory of a child who had a dream, asked a question, and disappeared before any of us expected. The ending is clear. Jay died that Sunday, hit by the car. Life moved on for everyone else. But for Dad and Grandpa, and for my family, part of them stayed in that moment. Jay's final question still echoes. A child asking to know what heaven is like. That's the story. I step out of my car at the edge of the gravel road, the engine ticking as it cools. My heart pounds, not from excitement, but from the strange hunger in the silence around me. The evening air is damp and cold, mixed with the faint odor of wet pine and rotting leaves. I have no company, no conversation, just me and the heavy world breathing around me. I came here because I thought I could fix something, repair a broken generator in the power station at the old logging camp. I drove nearly 2 hours into the woods. Along the way, I passed splintered tree stumps, decaying logging trucks left to rust, and a few derelict trailers. I told myself all that history was behind me. Now I stand before a squat concrete shed marked with fading letters. The doors hang off their hinges. I pull a flashlight from my backpack and step inside. The smell hits me first: machine oil, metal, damp earth. My boots sink slightly in the mud floor. I sweep the beam around. A rusted generator sits in the center, cables trailing off into the walls. I bend and feel its weight beneath my fingers. My hands are steady. I know what to do. Minutes stretch into hours. I test wires, swap fuses, check oil levels, clean contacts. My flashlight beam shakes as sweat drips down my scalp and drips into my eyes. Outside, darkness deepens until my view through broken windows is nothing but black shapes of trees. I sit upright and wipe my face on the sleeve of my jacket. I pause and listen. No wind, no animals. I realize the forest has grown still. Even the distant drip from leaking pipes stops. I grip a socket wrench and shut off the fuel line. I flick the switch. The generator hums, easing into life. The hum bubbles into a steady growl. Lights in the shed flicker on. A soft flood of electricity. Relief washes through me. Then something snaps. I freeze. The machine sputters, the hum stutters. In that interruption, I catch it, a sound outside. Something heavy brushing against the chain link fence around the clearing. I don't want to look. I don't look at the windows. I breathe. Oil drips from the generator, a tiny rhythm beneath my pounding heart. The hum returns, steadier now. Just as I flip the final switch to power up the nearby cabins, I hear another sound. The generator labors, and beyond it, the faint echo of footsteps, crunching over gravel. They stop. The world holds its breath. The generator hums. My hands are wet. I taste iron in my mouth. I stand, reluctantly, and step out into the night. Rain has started to fall, tiny cold drops on my face. The floodlight above the station flicks on, a halo of pale yellow, jagged through the darkness. The cabins that line the clearing glow, windows dark, doors closed. I never saw anyone living here. Now at least the light is on. At least there's warmth somewhere close. I carry my backpack behind me and head toward the nearest cabin. The rain picks up. My footsteps slip in mud. My flashlight's additional beam slices through the downpour. I reach the door, let myself in. It's empty, clean enough. The soft drip of rain through a crack in the roof. A wooden table, a metal bed frame. I plug in a small heater. It sputters to life with a faint glow, a whining cough. Warmth spreads slowly. I close the window shutter, not wanting to look outside. I breathe, listening to the heater and the rain and hope. Then I step over to the small kitchen counter and open my lunch bag. A sandwich gone cold. A bottle of water. The lights flick inside the cabin as power takes hold. For a moment I'm so relieved I almost laugh. Outside there's no more music of footsteps. The rain masks everything. I think, if something was out there, maybe it moved on. Maybe it never came this close. I sit and eat slowly. Every bite tastes of exhaustion and triumph. I finish both sandwiches. I wash my hands with cold water from a rusty pipe. I decide to stay. I climb into the bed and unzip my coat. It's too loud. I toss it neatly on the box springs. I lie down and stare at the ceiling boards. Rain drips steadily overhead. The heater hums below. My heartbeat slows. The cabin now feels safe. Electricity hums, warmth persists. I close my eyes. I let my muscles unwind. I let the silence fill me. In the early hours, morning light seeps under the shutter slats. The storm has passed. I open the window to clear air. I see deer tracks in the mud near the door. A rabbit hopped away this morning. Nothing human. The forest is alive again, normal sounds of birds and rustling leaves. I step outside wearing my boots again. The gravel road glistens. I see the generator still purring behind me. I breathe in the fresh air. I walk back to the shed and check the machine again. Everything holds. No odd noises, no broken cables. I shut down the generator when I'm done. I lock the shed's old metal door as best I can. I look at the cabins bathing in sunrise. Then I walk back to my car, boots splashing in puddles, rain-damp air filling my lungs. I unlock my car, climb in. I feel safe. I feel good. I start the engine. It turns over smoothly. I drive up the gravel road to the asphalt and toward home. The mystery of those footsteps, whatever they were, remains unanswered, but they did nothing, made no contact. I take one last look in the rearview mirror as the sun climbs above the trees. The camp, dark cabins, and silent shed recede behind me. I breathe out. I made it through. I fixed what needed fixing. I'm alive. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend. I had driven out alone to a cabin a friend of mine owned, deep in the hills of western Montana. He had offered it to me for a few days after hearing how burned out I was from work. I'd been living in the city for too long, drowning in noise and artificial light. The idea of silence, real silence, had started to sound like heaven. No cars, no phones, no crowds. Just me, the woods, and some peace. The cabin sat about 20 miles off the main road, reachable only by a narrow gravel trail that twisted through the trees like a snake. My old truck struggled with the climb, the tires spitting gravel as I made my way higher into the forest. It took almost an hour to get there after leaving the highway, and by the time I parked and stepped out, I was surrounded by total quiet. The cabin wasn't much, just a one-room wooden box with a tiny porch and a chimney poking out the roof. No power, no cell signal, no running water. There was a wood stove in the corner, a stack of firewood beside the porch, and an outhouse 20 feet off to the side in the trees. It was perfect. I felt something in my shoulders relax for the first time in months. The first night was uneventful. I lit some candles, warmed up soup on a small camping stove, and sat on the porch in the dark, listening to the sounds of the forest. Crickets, the wind in the trees, the occasional snapping branch. I couldn't see anything past the edge of the clearing, just blackness. But I didn't mind. It felt peaceful. I went to sleep early and woke up around dawn. Birds were chirping. The air smelled fresh, cold, and clean. I took a short walk through the trees, keeping to the narrow path that wound up the hill behind the cabin. I wasn't going far, just getting my legs moving. The forest was dense and old. Tall pines, thick underbrush, and moss-covered rocks. It had that heavy quiet you only get in deep woods, where sound seems to vanish into the trees. I spent the day chopping a bit of firewood, reading an old paperback I'd brought, and taking another walk in the afternoon. I didn't see a single person, car, or plane all day. That was part of what made it strange when I noticed something that evening that hadn't been there before. I had stepped out onto the porch to grab more firewood when I saw a set of footprints in the dirt. They were clear, fresh. Hiking boots, maybe a size or two bigger than mine. They came from the direction of the trail and stopped a few feet from the porch, then turned and went back the way they came. There were no vehicle tracks, no other signs of someone coming through. I hadn't heard anything either. I just stood there for a while, staring at them. Something about it bothered me. I told myself it could have been a hunter or someone hiking through. Maybe they saw the cabin and came to check it out, then left. But why not knock or call out? Why just approach and then leave without making a sound? I walked around the clearing, checking the edges of the trees, looking for more tracks, but saw nothing else. When I followed the footprints back toward the trail, they only went a short distance before vanishing into harder ground where the dirt turned to gravel. That night, I locked the cabin door and kept the fire burning late. I didn't sleep well. The next morning, I felt tired and on edge. The silence that had felt peaceful before now seemed heavy, almost pressing. I kept thinking about those footprints. Around mid-morning, I decided to hike a bit farther out, just to clear my head. I followed the trail past the hill and into a deeper part of the woods I hadn't been before. It was steeper there, rockier. I walked for maybe 40 minutes before I realized I was being watched. It wasn't a sound or a sight, just that feeling, the one you get when someone's eyes are on your back. I stopped, looked around. Nothing, but the feeling didn't go away. I kept walking, slower now, ears straining for any sound. After another few minutes, I heard something behind me, a faint crack, like a twig snapping under a foot. I turned fast. Nothing again, just trees and silence. But I knew what I heard. I stood still for a long time, listening, staring at the trees. I didn't see anything move, but every instinct I had was telling me I wasn't alone. I slowly started walking back, trying not to make too much noise. Every few steps, I stopped and listened. I never heard anything else. But I also didn't shake that feeling. When I got back to the cabin, I checked around again. No new footprints. No signs of anyone. But I couldn't relax. I stayed inside the rest of the day. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I kept thinking I heard things moving outside. Maybe animals, I told myself. But I kept the fire going, just in case. The next morning, I made up my mind to leave. It wasn't fear exactly. More like my nerves were too fried to enjoy being out there anymore. I packed my things, made sure the fire was out, and locked up. I had just loaded the last bag into the truck when I saw something that made my stomach drop. There was something tied to a tree about 20 feet into the woods, just off to the left of the clearing. I hadn't seen it before. It looked like fabric. I walked over slowly. As I got closer, I saw it was a strip of flannel shirt, torn and knotted around the trunk of the tree. Below it, scratched into the bark, was a simple message. Leave. That's all it said. The letters weren't carved deep, but they were clear and fresh. No moss, no aging. It had been done recently. I backed away and got in the truck without looking back. I drove faster than I should have down the trail, the gravel spraying out behind the tires. I didn't slow down until I hit pavement. When I reached the nearest town, I pulled into a gas station and sat there for a while, hands shaking. I looked at my phone and saw I had full bars again. I considered calling someone, maybe the local sheriff. But what would I say? Someone walked near my cabin, scratched a word into a tree. It didn't seem like much. Still, I reported it to my friend when I got back. He said he hadn't been up to the cabin in months, and no one else had keys. He seemed unsettled, said he might go check it out later himself. I didn't ask him if he ever did. I haven't been back there since. I don't know who was watching me out there, or why they left that message. But I've thought about it often. About the silence, the feeling of being watched, the footprints that led up to my door. Somewhere in those woods, someone knew I was there. Someone got close. Close enough to see me. Close enough to leave a message. And they never said a word. They just waited, watching from the trees, until I got the hint and left. Maybe they were just warning me. Or maybe they were hoping I'd stay longer. I didn't wait to find out. I took a few weeks off work that summer. Everything had been building up, long hours, missed weekends, no real rest. I needed time away from the city, away from people, away from everything. I remembered this old place up north, a small cabin a friend had told me about a couple of years ago. It was deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town, the kind of place people go when they want to be forgotten for a while. It wasn't on any website or rental service. You had to know someone who knew someone. I called the number I'd saved, and a man's voice told me it was still standing, still empty, and I could use it as long as I didn't mind roughing it. I packed what I thought I'd need: canned food, water jugs, a couple gas canisters, my camping stove, a sleeping bag, a thick coat just in case the nights got cold. I loaded up my old Jeep and started driving north early one morning. The highway gave way to narrow roads, which turned to gravel, and eventually just a single dirt track winding through pine and birch forest. It was late afternoon by the time I reached the cabin. It looked rough but solid. A single story with a sagging porch, peeling green paint, and a roof patched with different colors of shingles. The windows were dirty but unbroken. There was no electricity. I had to pump water by hand from a rusty spout out back. Inside, it was dusty and smelled like damp wood and old cloth. But there was a working fireplace, a cot with a mattress, and a table with two mismatched chairs. It was enough. The first 2 days passed easily. I hiked a little, read books I'd been meaning to finish, sat by the fire at night with a flashlight and some music from my old portable speaker. No cell signal, which was perfect. The silence was thick but peaceful. I saw deer the first morning, just standing between the trees, watching me. A few squirrels, birds I didn't recognize. The woods were full of small noises, but nothing threatening. It felt good to be out there, really alone. But on the third day, something changed. That morning started like the others. I boiled water for coffee, ate a couple granola bars, and set out to explore a little deeper into the forest. I brought a small day pack: water, a knife, a flashlight, and a snack. I wandered aimlessly, following a small stream for a while, then cutting uphill toward a ridge I thought might give me a view of the area. It took longer than I expected. The trees were dense, the ground uneven. Roots twisted under the dead leaves, and I had to watch every step. I slipped a couple of times, nothing serious, but enough to slow me down. When I reached the top, I could see over the treetops. Miles of forest in every direction. No houses, no towers, no roads. It felt good, but I didn't stay long. The wind picked up, and it had a bite to it. I turned back and started heading down, trying to retrace my steps, but the forest looked different now. The light had shifted. I walked for a while before realizing I wasn't seeing anything familiar. I stopped and looked around. The trees were close together, all thin trunks and tangled branches. No sign of the stream. No path. Just forest. I took a breath and reminded myself I'd been in worse situations. I pulled out my compass. I'd come mostly north to get here, so south should take me back toward the cabin. I adjusted my pack and started moving again, more carefully this time. After maybe an hour of steady walking, I started to notice something strange. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. No bird calls, no rustling in the underbrush, not even the wind. It was like someone had turned the volume all the way down. I stopped walking and listened. Nothing. Not even my own breathing seemed to make a sound. That kind of silence doesn't feel natural. It presses against your ears, makes you nervous. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. Everything looked normal, but I felt like I was being watched. I picked up my pace. No running. I didn't want to trip or get more lost, but I moved fast. Every so often I thought I heard something behind me, like a footstep or a branch snapping. But every time I stopped, it stopped too. I told myself it was just an animal. A deer maybe, following from a distance. Or just my imagination. But the feeling didn't go away. The light was fading fast. I hadn't realized how late it was getting. I kept heading south, and finally, after what felt like forever, I saw something through the trees, the cabin. Relief hit me hard. I didn't even bother to be quiet anymore. I stomped through the underbrush, up to the porch, and inside, slamming the door behind me. I sat there for a while, just breathing. I checked my watch. It was nearly 7 p.m. I hadn't planned to be out that long. I got the fire going, made some food, and tried to shake off the unease. But even inside, I couldn't relax. I kept hearing things outside. Not close, not loud, but steady. Small thumps, branches cracking, something brushing against the walls. I told myself it was just wind or animals moving around. But it kept happening. That night I barely slept. I kept the flashlight in my hand and listened to every sound. At some point I must have dozed off, because I woke up suddenly to a sharp noise, like something hitting the window. I sat up fast, heart pounding. I didn't move, didn't turn on the light. Just sat there in the dark and listened. Nothing followed. No footsteps, no voices. Just silence again. After a long time, I laid back down, but I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning was gray and cold. I stayed close to the cabin, gathering wood, checking the area. I found prints around the back, not boots, not shoes. Bare feet. Large, maybe a man's, but the shape was off. Toes spread too wide, arched too high. No tread marks. I stared at them for a long time. There were at least 6 prints, all leading toward the cabin, none leading away. I thought about leaving right then, packing up, driving out. But I convinced myself it could have been a prank. Maybe someone was camping nearby and decided to mess with me. Still, I kept the hatchet close all day and didn't go far from the porch. That night, I barricaded the door with the table and stacked wood inside the window frame. I didn't want to risk anything. At around 1 a.m., I heard it again. Slow footsteps, crunching in the leaves just outside. I held my breath. They moved around the cabin, stopping now and then, like someone was listening. Then came a new sound, a soft tap against the window. Not hard, not urgent. Just one single, deliberate tap. I didn't move. I stayed in the cot, eyes wide, body frozen. After a few minutes, another tap. Then nothing. The silence stretched on. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might give me away. But nothing else happened. Eventually, the sounds faded. I didn't sleep at all that night. In the morning, I checked the window. A smudge on the glass. Something oily like a fingerprint, but too big. The pad of the finger alone was almost as wide as 2 of mine. I stepped back from the window and decided I was leaving. I packed quickly, tossed everything in the Jeep, didn't even clean the dishes. I turned the ignition. The engine cranked, then died. I tried again. Nothing. I popped the hood and stared at it, hoping for something obvious. The battery cables had been cut clean through. Not chewed. Cut. I backed away and locked the doors. I spent the day trying to figure out what to do. No cell signal. Nearest town was over 20 miles away through dense forest. I didn't know if I could make it, but I also didn't want to spend another night in that cabin. I considered walking the road out, but something in me resisted the idea. I kept looking at the trees like they were watching me. I stayed inside with every light I had. Flashlights, candles, fire. I sat in the corner with the hatchet and didn't let myself fall asleep. I watched the windows, the door, waited for any sign of movement. At some point past midnight, I heard something on the roof. Not branches, not animals. Wait. Slow footsteps across the shingles. It moved from one end to the other, then stopped. I didn't breathe. I just stared at the ceiling, waiting. Then one single knock on the roof, directly above me. I didn't react. Didn't run. I stayed perfectly still. And after a long time, the sound moved away. Down the roof, across the porch, then silence. At dawn, I opened the door slowly. The woods were still and pale. No prints, no signs. I grabbed my backpack, locked the cabin behind me, and started walking down the road. I didn't stop. Not for water, not for rest. I just kept moving. I walked for nearly 8 hours before I found a ranger station. I must have looked half mad, dirty, eyes wild, barely able to talk. They gave me water, let me rest. I told them my Jeep had broken down and I needed a tow. I didn't mention the other stuff. I wasn't sure I believed it myself. A couple days later, I got a ride back to the cabin with a mechanic. He replaced the cables and got the Jeep running. I kept looking over my shoulder the whole time. When I left that place, I didn't look back. I haven't told anyone the full story. I don't even know what to make of it myself. But I haven't gone back into the woods since. And I never will. I don't care what it was, man, animal, something in between. I just know it wasn't supposed to be there. And it knew I wasn't either. I never really liked driving at night, especially on roads I wasn't familiar with. But that week, I had no choice. I was returning from a job in a small town out west, somewhere past the last gas station for miles. It had taken longer than expected, and by the time I was done loading equipment back into my truck, the sun was already gone, and the sky was just this deep, dark blue. I checked my phone before I got in the truck. No signal. That wasn't surprising. I'd already lost reception about half an hour before even arriving at the job site. It was a remote place, a long stretch of farmland and low forest in every direction. I didn't want to stay the night there. The place gave off a weird feeling, not haunted or anything, just empty. I've always had this thing about being too far from people. Not because I like people, but because when there's nobody around and something goes wrong, you're just on your own. That thought always sat heavy with me. I started the truck and pulled out onto the road, heading east. I knew I'd have to drive for a while before I saw another sign of life. My GPS had gone blank hours ago, but I remembered enough of the turns to be confident for a while. The road was narrow. It wasn't gravel, but it was rough. No lane lines, no lights, just the beam from my headlights cutting through the dark like a knife. Trees lined both sides, and the branches sometimes arched over the road like a tunnel. Occasionally, I'd see something dart across the road, a rabbit, maybe a fox, but nothing unusual. About 30 minutes in, I noticed something strange. The temperature inside the cab felt like it dropped. I checked the controls. Everything looked fine. No AC on, heater was off. I rolled the window up tighter, just in case it had slipped open. Then I noticed I was gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. My jaw felt tense. I couldn't explain why, but I just felt off. Not scared, not yet. Just like I'd walked into a room where someone had just been fighting. You know that thick air you feel? It was like that. I told myself I was just tired. Long day, empty road, no distractions. My mind was probably playing with itself. The first truly strange thing happened about 10 minutes later. I came up to a bend in the road, and right at the curve, I saw a car on the side. Not parked. It looked like it had swerved into the grass and just stopped halfway into the ditch. The driver's side door was wide open, headlights still on. I slowed down and moved into the opposite side of the road to give it space. As I passed, I instinctively looked toward the driver's seat. No one was there. I looked in the rearview mirror, but all I could see was the dim outline of the back of the car, slowly shrinking into the distance behind me. I slowed to a stop maybe 100 feet ahead. Something didn't sit right. If someone had broken down or crashed, they should have been nearby. No other cars. No houses. No sign of a person walking or trying to flag help. I thought about turning around, checking the car. Maybe someone needed help. But I didn't move. I sat there, engine running, looking in the mirror. Then, without warning, the car's headlights blinked off. I felt my skin crawl. There was no sound, no movement, just that car in the dark. After about a minute of frozen silence, I eased back onto the gas and kept driving. I told myself someone had come back for it, or maybe the battery finally died. But my gut didn't believe any of that. It just said, keep moving. I kept going. I didn't speed. I didn't slow. I just kept moving forward. About 15 minutes later, I passed a wooden sign. It was old, cracked down the middle, barely readable in my headlights. It looked like it once said Marrow Creek, but the paint had almost completely faded. I didn't remember that name from the map. I didn't even remember passing through it on my way to the job site. But there it was. Past the sign, the road split. No indicators. No markers. Just two paths left and right. I slowed to a crawl and checked for tire marks or signs of which road was more used. The left one looked slightly more worn, so I went with that. I stayed on it for another 15 minutes. Then I noticed the gas gauge. It had dropped faster than it should have. I remembered filling up earlier that morning. It had been full. Now it was scraping just above a quarter. That wasn't normal. I tapped the gauge, hoping it was stuck. It didn't budge. Another few miles down, I started seeing trees with markings on them. Red paint. Circles. Always the same shape, same height from the ground. They looked like surveyor's marks or something used to mark trails. But there were too many of them. Every few trees. On both sides of the road. The feeling in my chest got heavier. It wasn't fear yet, but it was close. Then I saw something up ahead. At first, it looked like a bundle of clothes or bags on the side of the road. But as I got closer, I realized it was a bicycle. Just a plain, rust-colored bike, lying on its side in the grass. One was still slowly spinning. I didn't stop. I didn't even look at it as I passed. About 5 minutes later, I saw another one. This one was on the opposite side of the road, a different color, also lying on its side. Its wheel bent like someone had hit it or it had fallen hard. No bodies, no blood, just empty bikes. And then, right after that, I saw the first house. It was set back from the road, behind a thin line of trees. No lights on. Old. Maybe a farmhouse, but it looked abandoned. Roof sagging on one side. Porch half collapsed. The grass in front of it was knee-high. I could see what looked like a truck in the back, covered in a dirty tarp. I considered stopping, knocking, asking for directions, or gas, but I didn't. Something about it made my stomach turn. Then I saw the next house. And the next. Same thing. No lights. Overgrown yards. No sign of people. No sound. No dogs barking. No movement in windows. Just old buildings, sitting under the weight of silence. That's when I realized I hadn't seen power lines in a while. I slowed down. The road had narrowed again, barely wide enough for one car. Trees pushed in close. The moon was behind clouds. The only light was from my truck. And then, in the beams of my headlights, I saw someone standing in the road. No bike. No car. Just standing there. I hit the brakes hard. The tires skidded on loose gravel, and the truck came to a stop maybe 20 feet away. It was a man, middle-aged, thin, wearing what looked like a gray shirt and dark pants. He didn't move. I didn't get out. I didn't even open the window. I leaned forward to see better. My headlights lit him up clearly, but there was no expression on his face. He wasn't looking at me, just straight ahead, like he was in some kind of trance. After what felt like a full minute, he turned and walked into the woods. Slow, no panic, no reaction to the truck. He disappeared into the trees. I waited a while, then slowly drove forward again. But I didn't feel alone anymore. I couldn't see anything in the mirrors. But that feeling that I was being watched clung to me the rest of the drive. About 10 minutes later, I saw another sign. It looked brand new. A simple board nailed to 2 posts. It read, "Turn back." I stopped the truck, just stared at it. Who put that there? Why? I'd gone too far to turn back. I had no clue how to even retrace my steps. So I kept going, but now I was fully alert. Every sound, every shadow, every flicker outside the headlights made me jump. My hands were sweating, even though the cab was cold. Then I came around another bend and saw lights up ahead. Not streetlights, headlights. 3 of them, parked across the road, side by side, blocking the way. Old cars, beaten up, no plates. Their engines were off, but their headlights were on, blinding me. I stopped the truck again, waited. No one came out. No movement. Just those cars like a barricade. I didn't honk. I didn't flash my lights. I just slowly reversed. Turned into a side path I'd barely noticed. It was rough, barely a trail. My truck bounced and rocked over every rock en route. I had no idea where I was going, but I needed to get off that road. Eventually, the trail opened into a small clearing. Just enough room to park. I killed the engine and lights. Silence. I sat there, breathing hard, heart racing. I don't know how long I waited. Maybe an hour. Maybe more. Eventually, I dozed off in the seat. When I woke up, the sun was rising. I stepped out, stretched, and looked around. The trail behind me was barely visible. No sign of the main road. No tire tracks. But everything looked different in daylight. Less threatening. Just trees. Grass. Sky. I got back in the truck, found the trail again, and followed it until I found another road. Paved. With lane markings. 15 minutes later, I was at a gas station. I asked the clerk where I'd come from. She looked at the mud on my truck, confused. "There's nothing out that way," she said. "No towns. No roads. Not for years now." I didn't argue. I just filled the tank, washed my face, and drove home. I never figured out what that place was. No names matched the signs I saw. No roads on any map matched the ones I'd taken. But I still think about it. And I still won't drive unknown roads at night. Not anymore. I had never really believed in being watched. Not in the paranoid sense, anyway. You grow up hearing about people who feel eyes on them, or who swear someone was following them. But I always chalked it up to anxiety or an overactive imagination. I'd been out in the woods hundreds of times, hiking, camping, backpacking. I always packed smart, stayed alert, and kept my distance from anything sketchy. I thought that made me safe. I thought that was enough. Last fall, I took a solo trip up north. I'd done a few solo hikes before, but this was going to be my longest one. A 5-day stretch deep in a remote section of forest not too far from the Canadian border. I'd planned everything for weeks. Mapped out my route, packed carefully, brought a GPS, and let a couple people know the general area I'd be in. There wasn't much cell service where I was headed, but that was part of the appeal. The first 2 days were beautiful. Cold mornings, clear skies, and the quiet kind of stillness that you can only get miles from roads or power lines. I stuck to the trail, made camp before dusk, and slept soundly both nights. No animals, no bad weather, no problems. But on the third day, things started to feel off. I don't even know when it started, exactly. There wasn't one big moment, just small things. It was early in the morning. I'd packed up my tent and was working my way along a narrow ridge that overlooked a dry creek bed below. The wind was still, and all I could hear were my own footsteps, the occasional bird, and the rustle of my pack. But every now and then, I'd stop, not on purpose, just kind of instinctively, and I'd listen. And I'd hear nothing. That's not normal in the woods. You always hear something: birds, wind in the leaves, squirrels, water. But this stretch was silent. Not just quiet, silent. As if the whole place was holding its breath. I kept walking. It was probably just nerves. Or maybe I was imagining things because I was alone. I tried not to focus on it. But I noticed something else around mid-morning. I'd been hiking downhill toward a valley where I planned to set up camp by a small lake. I'd passed a few deer trails and old logging tracks, and I thought I saw a black bear's prints at one point, but nothing fresh. But then, about halfway down, I saw something strange in the dirt. It was a boot print. Not mine. I wear size 11 trail runners with a very distinct tread pattern. These prints were bigger. Maybe a 13 or 14. Heavy tread. Hiking boots. Deep set, which meant whoever made them was carrying weight. And they were recent. Not fresh enough that the edges were crisp, but no more than a day or two old. That wouldn't have bothered me so much on its own. The trails were public, after all, but these weren't on the trail. They were about 20 yards off to the left, heading through the brush. And they weren't following the terrain. They cut diagonally up and over the hill, through dense undergrowth, like whoever made them wasn't following any path at all. I stood there looking at them for a while. Part of me wanted to follow them, just to see where they went. But that was stupid. There was no reason to. I didn't know who they belonged to, and the last thing I needed was to get lost trying to track some stranger's footprints. Still, I couldn't shake the weird feeling I had. I kept checking over my shoulder for the rest of the day. I never saw anyone, but I started to notice more little signs as I walked. A broken branch that didn't look natural. A scuff mark on a rock like someone had slipped. Things that, again, could easily be nothing. Could be animals. Could be coincidence. But they all pointed in the same direction, behind me. I reached the lake by late afternoon. It was small and still, nestled in a bowl of trees that were just starting to show signs of turning. I filtered some water, set up my tent on a flat patch of mossy ground, and gathered some firewood. I wasn't planning on a big fire, just enough for warmth and to boil water. I didn't want to attract animals. But as night fell, I found myself building it a little higher than usual, just enough to throw more light. I told myself it was for comfort, that I just didn't like how quiet the forest was. But the truth is, I wanted something between me and the dark. I wanted something that felt safe. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard something. Not close, but not far either. A snap of a twig, a soft crunch of leaves. Once, I could have sworn I heard a faint cough. Just a single, dry sound, like someone clearing their throat in the cold. I sat up in my tent, not moving, barely breathing. The fire had burned down to coals, and the woods outside were black. I waited for something else, another noise, a shape, anything. But nothing came. After a while, I convinced myself it was just the woods settling. Maybe a deer. I still didn't sleep. By morning, I felt wired and stiff. I got moving fast, didn't even bother making coffee. I packed up quickly and got back on the trail, heading for the next ridge that would take me closer to my pickup point. I only had about 2 more days of hiking left, but something in me had changed. I wasn't enjoying it anymore. I wasn't relaxed. I kept checking behind me, kept pausing to listen. I felt like I was being watched, like someone knew exactly where I was. Around noon, I came to a split in the trail. To the left, the official route curved around the side of a hill and dropped into a narrow canyon. To the right, there was an old logging road, overgrown and clearly unused, but it cut across a high slope and rejoined the trail a few miles ahead. I didn't think long. I chose the logging road. I figured, if someone was following me, they'd expect me to stay on the trail. If I took the road, I could double back, or at least buy myself some distance. I know it sounds paranoid, but by then, my gut was screaming that something was wrong. I made good time up the slope. The old road was rough, with fallen branches and weeds, but it was open enough to move fast. I kept looking for signs behind me. I saw nothing, heard nothing. but I also didn't relax. I knew that didn't mean I was alone. About 3 miles in, I stopped to rest. I crouched behind a thick pine trunk, drank some water, and tried to slow my breathing. That's when I saw it. Across the ravine, maybe 200 yards away, up near the tree line, a shape. Not moving, not clear, just a figure standing still. Too far to make out details, but it was tall, solid, upright. I stared for a long time. It didn't move. I blinked and looked again. Still there. I packed up and moved fast. The rest of that day was a blur. I hiked until my legs burned, cutting through brush, scrambling over rocks, sometimes losing the road entirely. I wasn't even following the map anymore. I just wanted distance. I just wanted space. By the time I stopped, it was well after dark. I didn't make a fire. I didn't cook. I found a narrow dip between 2 rocks, laid out my sleeping bag, and crawled in fully clothed. I kept my knife close. I kept my headlamp off. I waited. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I moved before sunrise. My GPS had a signal again, and I used it to locate the fastest way back to the trailhead. It meant cutting across uneven ground and skipping the last section of the trail entirely, but I didn't care. I needed out. That last day was a blur of panic. I didn't stop. Not once. I drank while walking, ate granola from my pocket. I don't even remember most of it. Just trees and dirt and rocks, and the constant pressure of feeling watched. At one point, I found a tree with fresh gouges in it. Not bear marks, not claw marks. It looked like someone had dragged the tip of a knife through the bark slowly, deliberately. That was the last straw. I made it back to the trailhead by late afternoon. My car was there, untouched. The air felt different, lighter. I climbed in, locked the doors, and sat for a long time, staring out the windshield at the trees. And that's when I saw something else. Tucked under the windshield wiper was a scrap of paper. Just a torn piece from a notebook, folded twice. I picked it up with shaking hands. There was only one thing written on it, in small, sharp handwriting. "You're fast." I sat frozen for what felt like hours. There was no one else in the lot. No vehicles. Just me. That meant someone had followed me all the way back. Stayed close. Close enough to leave a note under my wiper without me seeing. Close enough to know what I was doing. How fast I was going. How scared I'd gotten. I didn't report it. I don't know why. Maybe I thought no one would believe me. Maybe I didn't want to deal with it. Maybe I was just too tired. I drove home in silence. I washed my gear, stored my pack, and avoided the woods for months. Even now, almost a year later, I can't go hiking without checking over my shoulder every few minutes. I can't camp without waking at every sound. People always ask why I don't hike alone anymore. I just tell them I had a bad trip. But the truth is, I don't think I was alone out there. Not for a second. I had been working construction for nearly 6 years, mostly on residential jobs. My back was always stiff in the mornings, and my hands were permanently rough. Still, I liked the work. There was something solid and satisfying about finishing a job you could point at and say, "I built that." Most of our projects were in or around the city, but once in a while, we'd get a rural gig that pulled us far off the grid. This one started like that. My boss said we had a new client, some guy who bought land way out near the foothills. He wanted a storage shed and some basic framing work done for a cabin he'd build later. The land was cheap, isolated, and the road to it was barely more than a dirt track. It was the kind of job that didn't pay great, but none of us were in a place to turn it down. It was a 4-man job. Me, Colin, Terry, and Julio. Colin and I drove out first to check the site and drop off equipment, while the others would join us 2 days later. We packed the truck with the usual: tools, jacks, supports, fuel, food for a few days, tents, and a backup generator. There was no signal out there, so we brought a CB radio for emergencies, just like always. The place was farther out than I expected. After leaving the highway, we drove another 40 minutes on a gravel road that narrowed into a winding trail through trees. The last 2 miles were the worst, deep ruts from old logging trucks and narrow enough that we had to fold in the side mirrors. The trees pressed in so close I kept thinking the paint on the truck would come back shredded. When we reached the site, it didn't look like much, just a flat clearing cut out of the woods with a small creek running along one edge. The guy had done some of the land prep himself, felled a bunch of trees, burned the brush, and dumped gravel. We found a metal stake in the ground with red tape that marked the future cabin's corner. We got to work unloading, staking out the shed's frame, checking the soil, and prepping the lumber. By sunset, we had the basics squared away and built a small fire to heat up some canned beans. It got dark quickly, and without cell service or any light pollution, the sky was just endless black. The stars looked fake, like a planetarium ceiling. Colin set up his tent maybe 15 feet from mine. We didn't say much as we settled in, just the usual grunts and tired sighs. I lay there listening to the wind moving through the trees, the creek gurgling nearby. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. Around midnight, I heard something. I wasn't fully asleep yet. It was a kind of soft crunch, leaves or twigs maybe. I figured it was a deer or raccoon. Then I heard it again, slower this time. The way it moved didn't sound like any animal I could name. It had weight. That was what made my skin tighten. It wasn't scrambling like a raccoon or light-footed like a deer. It sounded like something placing its feet down with thought, deliberately. I sat up and looked out through the mesh. Nothing. Just dark trees and the faint outline of Colin's tent. The sound had stopped. I waited a long time, body tensed up like a coiled spring. Eventually, I eased back down. Must have been nothing. Next morning, I asked Colin if he heard anything. He just shrugged and said he slept fine. I let it go. Maybe I'd imagined it. We worked all day, made good progress on the frame. Julio and Terry were due to arrive that evening, but when it got dark and they still weren't there, we figured they got delayed or lost. CB wasn't picking up anything, but that wasn't uncommon in areas like this. That night, I was more alert. I stayed up by the fire longer, poking at the coals with a stick and sipping lukewarm coffee from a dented thermos. Colin had already gone to bed. The woods around us were so quiet it started to feel unnatural. I started focusing too hard on background sounds, the whisper of wind through the pine needles, the occasional creak of a shifting tree. Then I heard it again. Same sound, same slow, careful steps, but this time it was closer. I turned off the lantern and crouched low behind a pile of cut lumber. The firelight flickered low, throwing moving shadows that didn't help my nerves. I held my breath and tried to follow the sound. The steps circled slowly around the site, never coming into view, just outside the reach of the firelight. I couldn't tell if it was one person or two. Sometimes the spacing between steps shifted like someone stopping and starting again. I stayed crouched until my knees hurt, then quietly slipped back into my tent and zipped it slowly. I held my hammer tight against my chest and didn't sleep at all. Morning came gray and cold. I checked around the site and found nothing. No prints, no disturbed dirt, no snapped branches. Colin looked at me like I was going off the deep end. Julio and Terry still hadn't shown. By afternoon, we were running low on gas for the generator, and I told Colin we'd need to siphon some from the truck if they didn't show by night. He agreed, but I could tell he was getting worried too. That evening, we heard an engine in the distance and nearly jumped with relief. But the sound faded before it reached us. No vehicle ever arrived. The fire was smaller that night. We were rationing wood until the others arrived with more supplies. Colin turned in early again. I stayed up. It was around midnight when the sound came again, this time from the opposite side of the clearing. I grabbed a flashlight and the hammer again, stepped out quietly, and tried to see where it was coming from. I aimed the light toward the trees. Nothing. Then I heard the sharp snap of a branch, loud, like someone stepped on it hard. The flashlight trembled in my hand as I scanned again. Still nothing. And then I caught it. A shape. Not an animal. Not deer-shaped. More like a person crouched low, just behind the tree line. I stepped back slowly, turned, and hurried to Colin's tent. I shook the tent and whispered his name, but he didn't respond. I unzipped it halfway and found it empty. His sleeping bag was there, but it was flat and cold. My stomach dropped. I ran back to the fire and called out his name. Nothing answered. Not even birds stirred. I circled the site twice with the flashlight and hammer. Still no sign of him. No note. No trail. I couldn't understand how someone could disappear without a sound. I didn't sleep at all. I sat near the fire with the hammer across my lap and the flashlight in my other hand, burning through batteries. The woods felt alive in a bad way, watchful. At first light, I packed everything I could into the truck. I tried the CB again. Still dead air. I drove fast, bouncing hard over the ruts, scraping against the tree limbs. It took me over an hour to reach a point where I had enough signal to call the boss. When I told him what happened, he went quiet. Then he said Julio and Terry never left the city. Their car broke down that morning, and they hadn't even packed yet. They had been planning to call and tell us they'd be a day late, which meant we were completely alone out there. Colin was never found. A search party combed the area for a week. Dogs, drones, foot patrol. No signs, no tracks, nothing. They said maybe he wandered off, got turned around, fell into a ravine or hit his head. But the woods weren't that complicated. We were less than a quarter mile from a creek and open terrain. I told them about the sounds, about the movement, about the figure in the trees. They chalked it up to stress, isolation, fatigue. I didn't argue, but I remember the firelight. I remember the shape behind the trees. And I remember how it never came into view, like it knew exactly how far the light reached and stayed just outside it. I remember how the steps circled, how deliberate they were, and how they always came at the same hour of night. Sometimes now, when I'm alone at night, I imagine those same steps outside, just beyond the walls, moving slow, careful, like they're waiting, but I never go back to that place. The land is still there. The shed was never finished. No one took the job after that. I hadn't seen my cousin Eric in almost 7 years. We used to be close when we were younger, spending summers together at my uncle's old hunting cabin deep in the woods of northern Minnesota. But as life moved on, college, work, and everything else got in the way. Then out of nowhere, he called me last spring. Said he wanted to spend a week out at the cabin like we used to. He'd already gotten the keys from his dad, and all I had to do was bring a sleeping bag, some gear, and show up. No pressure, just a chance to get away from the noise of everything. At that time, I needed the break. Work was killing me, my apartment felt like a cage, and I hadn't had fresh air in months. So I said yes. I packed light, just a sleeping bag, warm clothes, canned food, my old hiking boots, and a camp stove. I met Eric in Duluth, and from there we drove up in his beat-up 4Runner, bumping along narrow Forest Service roads until we hit the gate at the edge of the property. The cabin wasn't much. Just a single room with a bunk bed, a small wood stove, and a table. No electricity, no running water, no cell signal. It sat next to a shallow stream and was surrounded by miles and miles of trees. That's what I liked about it. It was quiet, nothing artificial humming in the background. No one shouting or driving or honking, just wind through the trees and the occasional bird. We spent the first couple of days doing what we always used to do. We fished in the stream, hiked the trails around the area, chopped firewood, and cooked simple meals on the camp stove or over the fire pit outside. At night, we sat under the stars, drank cheap beer, and talked about stuff from the past, some good memories, some not so good. It felt like we hadn't missed a beat. On the third day, something felt a little off. I woke up early that morning, before Eric, and went outside to take a piss. The woods were quiet like always, but something felt heavy. I couldn't really explain it. It wasn't the weather. The sky was clear and the air was cool. But there was this strange stillness, like everything was holding its breath. As I stood there, I saw something out of place near the tree line about 50 yards off. A pile of branches stacked like a little teepee, right between two pines. We hadn't built it, and I didn't remember seeing it the day before. It didn't look like something random from wind or snow. It was neat, intentional. But I figured maybe it was just an old hunting blind, or something some local had made years ago. When Eric got up, I told him about it. He shrugged, said it was probably nothing. He didn't seem worried, so I let it go. We spent most of the day out hiking toward a small lake we remembered from our childhood. It was about 5 miles through the woods, and by the time we got back to camp that evening, we were dead tired. I almost forgot about the weird structure near the trees. That night, just as we were settling in, I went out to the firewood pile to grab a few more logs. I had my flashlight with me, and when I swept it across the woods, I thought I saw someone standing just beyond the trees. I froze. My first instinct was to call out, but I didn't. I just stared. The light was weak at that distance, and I wasn't sure what I was looking at. It might have been a tree trunk or even a shadow. I waited a few seconds, then aimed the flashlight again. Nothing, just the woods. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe I was tired. Maybe the shadows were playing tricks. I didn't tell Eric. I didn't want to sound paranoid. The next morning, I went back to that spot where I'd seen the little teepee structure. It was gone. completely gone. No branches, no footprints, no signs that anything had ever been there. That's when I started to feel something wasn't right. I walked in circles around the area, scanning the ground for broken twigs or anything out of place, but there was nothing. That whole day, I kept looking over my shoulder. The woods didn't feel open anymore. They felt tight, like they were watching us. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Every little sound made my eyes snap open. At some point, just after midnight, I thought I heard footsteps outside the cabin. Not animals, these were deliberate, paced footsteps, crunching dry leaves. I lay there, frozen in my sleeping bag, barely breathing. I didn't want to wake Eric unless I was sure. I waited. After a minute or so, they stopped. I didn't hear anything else the rest of the night. In the morning, I went outside to check. No tracks, but the firewood pile had been knocked over, like someone had kicked it. It wasn't a raccoon or deer. This was deliberate. I finally told Eric everything. The person I thought I saw, the vanishing teepee, the footsteps. He looked uneasy, but still tried to play it off. Said maybe some local kids were messing around, or some other campers were nearby. But there weren't supposed to be any other cabins or sites for at least 10 miles in every direction. We both agreed to keep our eyes open and maybe cut the trip short if anything else weird happened. That day, we didn't go far from the cabin. We stayed close, gathering wood and checking the area. Around noon, we heard something snap in the woods. Not a branch falling, more like someone stepping on a stick. Loud. Close. We both froze and turned toward the sound. About 20 feet into the trees, we saw a flash of movement. It was fast, too fast to make out clearly, but it was human, definitely human. Someone ducking behind a tree or moving downhill. Eric grabbed the hatchet from the chopping stump and started yelling into the woods, even though we'd agreed not to talk to anyone. He shouted, asking who it was and what they wanted. No response, just silence again. We spent the next hour checking the area. Nothing, no footprints. No sounds. The forest swallowed everything up. That night, we didn't sleep. We sat up with the lantern between us, both holding whatever tools we could use as weapons. Around 2 a.m., we heard something scrape against the side of the cabin. Just a single drag of something hard along the wood siding. I got up slowly and peeked through the small window, but I couldn't see anything in the dark. When the sun finally rose, we were already packing. We didn't speak much. It was understood. We were getting out. We shoved everything into our packs, dumped the rest, and locked up the cabin. We started hiking out to the road where we had parked the 4Runner. It was about 3 miles on foot through thick woods. We moved fast, but the feeling of being watched never left us. I kept looking over my shoulder every couple of minutes. The woods were quiet again. Too quiet. When we finally got back to the road, we saw the truck parked just ahead. That should have been the moment we relaxed, but something was wrong. The driver's side door was wide open. We hadn't left it like that. Eric ran ahead, yelling my name, and I sprinted after him. Inside the truck, everything had been ransacked. Our extra food gear, and even the map we left on the dashboard were gone. On the hood, there was a single handprint, muddy, smeared with long fingers. Not clawed, not animal. Just dirty and human. We didn't waste any time. We jumped in, locked the doors, and got the hell out of there. We didn't talk for a long time. Just drove in silence until we were back in Duluth. We stayed at a cheap motel that night and barely slept. In the weeks that followed, I kept checking the news and local forums for any stories. Missing persons, arrests, strange sightings, but nothing ever came up. It was like whoever was out there didn't want to be found. Or maybe they'd been watching that cabin for years, just waiting for someone to show up. I haven't gone back to the woods since then. Eric and I still talk, but we don't bring it up. Not anymore. It's something we both carry, something unspoken, a weight in the back of our minds. Every once in a while, I'll be walking home or taking out the trash and feel like I'm being watched again. That same stillness, that same pressure. I don't know who was out there with us or what they wanted, but I know it wasn't just kids messing around. It wasn't a coincidence. They were watching, waiting. They knew we were there, and they didn't want us to leave. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend. Nothing complicated, nothing wild. Just me, my car, and a 2-day break from city noise. I'd booked a small rental cabin way out in the hills, about 3 hours from where I lived. Not a fancy place, Just a wooden box with a bed, a kitchenette, a bathroom, and a porch that looked out over a long stretch of trees. I'd been there once before, a year ago. It was peaceful. Nothing but hills, trees, and the sound of wind moving through the leaves. No cell service. No internet. That was part of the appeal. I left late on a Friday morning, packed light. Just some food, clothes, a few books, a flashlight, and a couple tools I usually brought on solo trips. The weather was clear. No rain in the forecast. Driving out of the city felt like shedding weight. As the buildings fell away and the road thinned, I felt my shoulders relax. The last 30 minutes of the drive were always a little rough. The paved road ended, and a dirt track wound through thick woods. It was wide enough for one car, maybe two if you drove carefully. The cabin sat near the end of it, perched at the edge of a small slope, with thick trees behind and a dry creek bed running down the hill. When I pulled up, everything looked the same. The porch steps were a bit more worn, and some weeds had grown around the side, but otherwise it looked untouched. I unpacked, locked the car, and settled in. The first few hours were calm. I read for a while, walked around the edge of the property, made some food, and watched the sun drop low through the trees. As night came on, I sat out on the porch. The quiet there always hit me the hardest. No cars, no planes, just wind, insects, the occasional bird. It wasn't until maybe 10 p.m. that I noticed something. I'd been reading by flashlight, sitting in a worn chair on the porch. I kept hearing this soft crackle. Not constant, just now and then, like dry branches snapping. At first I thought it was just a raccoon, or maybe a deer walking through the brush. But the sound kept happening. Not close, but not far either. It was down by the dry creek bed. Every few minutes, crack, crunch, then nothing. I got up and pointed the flashlight down the hill, scanning slowly. I couldn't see anything. I held my breath and waited. Nothing moved. I stood like that for a full minute before sitting back down. Figured maybe my ears were playing tricks on me. 10 minutes later, I heard it again. This time it was closer. Same sound, crack, crunch, but up the hill now, closer to the trees behind the cabin. That bothered me. I hadn't heard anything move between the creek bed and the back of the cabin. No crunching leaves, no rustling. Just quiet, then a sound behind me. I stood up and shined the flashlight at the trees. The beam caught only trunks and undergrowth. Nothing unusual. Still, I went inside, locked the door, and pulled the blinds. Felt stupid doing it, but something in my gut didn't like the pattern. Inside, I tried to distract myself. Made some tea. Read. But the sounds didn't stop. Now and then, I'd hear it, something stepping on dry leaves. Always one or two steps, then silence. Then it'd come from another direction. At one point, I thought I heard something brush the side of the cabin wall. Just a light scratch. I held my breath again and listened. Nothing followed. Eventually I managed to fall asleep, but it wasn't deep sleep. I woke up a lot. Each time I did, I felt the silence pressing on the cabin like a weight. No wind, no insects, just nothing. Around 3:30 a.m., I heard what I thought was a thud, like something heavy dropping onto the porch. I stayed in bed, frozen. Didn't move. My heart was pounding. I waited for another sound, but none came. Not for a while. I must have dozed off again, because the next thing I remember clearly was sunlight filtering through the blinds. I got up, looked around. Everything looked normal. No footprints on the porch. Nothing out of place. I stepped outside slowly, scanning the woods. Nothing, but there was something odd. A smell. It was faint, but it was there. Like rot. Not garbage, not skunk, not animal droppings. Just rot. Something old and wrong. It was coming from the direction of the creek bed. I walked halfway down the hill, but couldn't see anything. I didn't want to go further. I spent most of that day trying to talk myself down, telling myself it was probably an animal, that I just overreacted. But the smell lingered. It came and went with the breeze. In the afternoon, I walked further down the dry creek. About 100 yards along, I found something strange. A small clearing with a ring of old rocks. It looked like a fire pit, but hadn't been used in a long time. The rocks were partly buried, but in the center was something I didn't like. Bones. A few scattered bones. Not large. Maybe raccoon or possum. But they weren't spread randomly. They were stacked. Not neatly, but like someone had put them there on purpose. A few sticks were mixed in, almost like a crude shape had been made, but collapsed. I turned around and walked straight back to the cabin. I wanted to pack up and leave, but I told myself it wasn't that weird. Maybe kids had camped out there long ago. Still, I brought my gear inside, kept my flashlight, knife, and small hatchet on the nightstand. Locked the door. Didn't sit on the porch that night. That second night was worse. Around midnight, I heard the first sound. Not outside. This time it was inside. A creak on the floor. Just one. Like weight shifting. I froze in bed, eyes wide open. I didn't move. Just listened. Nothing followed. I stared at the dark for what felt like an hour. Then I heard something again. A soft sound near the kitchen. Not footsteps exactly. More like a drag. Like someone brushing against a chair. I reached for the flashlight and clicked it on. Swept the beam across the room. Nothing. I got out of bed slowly. Moved through the cabin room by room. Flashlight in one hand, hatchet in the other. Nothing. No windows open. No doors unlocked. I even checked under the bed and inside the closet. Still nothing. I barely slept. When I woke up, the smell was back, stronger. It hit me the second I opened the front door. It was worse than rot. Like something dead and wet and burned, all at once. I walked around the side of the cabin and stopped. On the ground near the back steps was a dead bird. Not just dead, mangled. Torn open. Feathers scattered. No tracks. Just the bird. I buried it a little ways off and tried not to think about it. But now my head was full of doubts. Maybe someone was out there. Maybe someone was messing with me. I packed my things. I was supposed to stay one more night, but I didn't want to. Not with the way the air felt. Not with the way the woods had gone silent again. By late afternoon, I had the car loaded. I took one last look at the cabin. Something about it now felt off. Like it didn't want me there. I got in the car and started it up. About 5 minutes down the dirt road, I noticed something in the rearview mirror. A figure, standing near the edge of the trees. Not moving, just standing. It was far enough back I couldn't see any details. Just the shape. I kept driving. I didn't stop. When I hit the paved road, I didn't relax. I kept checking the mirror, kept glancing at the trees, but nothing followed. That was 6 months ago. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't go back. I checked online a few times to see if the cabin was still listed. It was, still available to rent. But every time I saw the listing photo, the porch, the trees, the dry creek, I felt sick. I've been on other trips since then, different places, but I've never stayed in a place that remote again. I still don't know what happened out there. Maybe it was just animals. Maybe it was someone living off-grid. Maybe it was nothing. But the smell, the way the sounds moved without patterns, the shape in the mirror, those things don't leave me. They sit in the back of my head, waiting, like the woods never really let me leave. I don't even know why I agreed to it. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe I just didn't want to be the only one in the group to say no. Whatever the reason, I found myself alone in an old hunting cabin, miles from town, deep in the woods, with no cell service, a cold wind sneaking through the cracks in the walls, and nothing but a lantern and my sleeping bag for comfort. The others were coming back in the morning. That was the deal. One night alone. I just had to make it to sunrise. The cabin belonged to Ryan's uncle. According to him, no one had used it in years. The wood was gray and brittle like old bones. The porch sagged in the middle, and the roofline dipped in 2 spots. Inside, it smelled like dust, mildew, and mice. There was an old cot, but I chose to sleep on the floor with my bag. The cot looked like it hadn't held a human being since the 70s. I didn't trust it not to collapse under me. The plan was simple. Hike out in the morning, spend the day at the river with the others, and then come back to the cabin alone for the night. No phones, no books, just me in the woods. They said it was a test of nerve, a kind of self-imposed challenge. I told myself it was no big deal. I'd done camping trips before. I wasn't scared of the dark. I wasn't a kid anymore, but it felt different once they left. The silence in the woods is not like silence anywhere else. It isn't quiet, exactly. It's full of little sounds. Cracks, creaks, wind brushing trees, branches popping, small rustles in the underbrush. My ears felt sharper out there, like they were picking up things they didn't want to hear. Every noise felt close. And when the sun dipped behind the hills and the shadows crept in, I could feel the cold settle down like a blanket soaked in ice water. I lit the lantern before it got too dark. The yellow light gave off just enough glow to push back the shadows but not far enough to be comfortable. The corners of the room stayed dark. The windows, though boarded halfway up, left just enough gaps to let in the wind. Every few minutes, I could hear the wooden planks creak as the air pushed against them. The first hour was manageable. I laid out my sleeping bag, ate a granola bar, and tried to focus on anything other than the fact that I was utterly alone. I played little games in my head to pass the time. Count the floorboards, trace the grain in the wall, close my eyes and try to remember every detail of the hike earlier that day. Anything to distract myself. But somewhere around 10 p.m., things started to shift. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a feeling, a slow build, a weight. It felt like the cabin had changed, like something had leaned in closer. I sat up in my sleeping bag and looked around. The lantern flickered once, then went steady again. There was nothing obviously wrong, no reason to panic, and yet my skin started to crawl. I told myself I was just being paranoid. I stood up, stretched, and walked to the door. Opened it. The woods were pitch black, the kind of dark that makes you feel blind. I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. I shut the door again quickly, heart beating faster than I wanted to admit. I latched the lock. Then I heard it, a soft crunch, like a footstep on gravel. My head whipped around toward the window. I stared through the cracks in the boards, but I couldn't see anything. I held my breath and listened. Nothing, just wind. I shook my head, laughed nervously, and told myself it was probably a branch falling, or an animal, but the feeling didn't leave. I sat back down in the corner, next to the lantern. I pulled the sleeping bag around me like a shield. My eyes kept drifting to the windows. And then it happened again. Another crunch. Closer this time. More deliberate. A step. I stood up slowly. Walked to the window. Pressed my eye to the crack. Darkness. Then movement. A flicker. A shape. Just at the edge of the tree line. It wasn't close enough to make out, but it was there. A lump against the dark. Not moving. Just there. I blinked. Looked again. Nothing. I sat back down. Now I couldn't relax. Every nerve in my body was alert. Tense. I stared at the lantern, watching the tiny flame dance in its glass cage. I felt trapped, like the light was giving me away. But I didn't dare turn it off. I kept telling myself I was imagining things. But then the crunching came back. Slower this time. Step. Pause. Step. Pause. It wasn't an animal. Animals moved differently. Quicker. Less precise. This was someone walking. My heart was pounding now. I grabbed the only thing nearby that could be used as a weapon, a rusted old fire poker leaning by the wall. I gripped it tightly, moved to the door, and pressed my ear against it. Silence. Then the faintest sound. A breath. Just one. Right on the other side of the door. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. The hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. Nothing. I backed away slowly. Sat back down. I didn't want to make any noise. Didn't want to give away my position. My hands were shaking. I held the poker in my lap and stared at the door. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Maybe more. The sound stopped. The feeling faded just a little. I started to believe again that it was just my mind playing tricks. That maybe it had just been wind and animals. But I didn't sleep. I sat there, stiff and cold all night. My eyes never left the door. My ears strained to catch every sound. And somewhere around 4 or 5 a.m., just before dawn, I finally stood up and peeked outside again. Nothing. I opened the door slowly, stepped onto the porch. The sky was starting to lighten. There was dew on the ground. My breath puffed white in the air. I walked around the cabin slowly. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Every step felt heavy. And that's when I saw it. Tracks. Footprints. Human. Leading from the woods to the cabin. Then stopping. Right at the door. They didn't go anywhere else. No return path. No detour. Just a single trail of prints ending at the front door. As if whoever it was had walked up to the cabin and never left. I stared at them for a long time. Tried to make sense of it. The prints were clear. Fresh. Right through the wet dirt and grass. I even counted them. 12 steps from the tree line to the porch. Then nothing. I looked around. My breath coming in fast puffs. I felt dizzy. That's when I realized the lock on the back door, the one I hadn't touched, was broken, hanging by a splinter of wood, like someone had tried to push it in. The inside of the doorframe was scratched, splintered, but not enough to get in. Whoever it was hadn't succeeded. Or maybe they hadn't tried hard enough. I packed up my things without bothering to eat. I left the cabin exactly as I'd found it, minus the footprints out front and the dented back door. I didn't wait for the others to come find me. I hiked back out of those woods faster than I'd ever hiked in my life. I never told the group what happened. I didn't see the point. I wouldn't have believed it if someone else had said it to me. They joked about how pale I looked when they saw me again, but I laughed it off. I haven't gone camping since. Not alone. Not with friends. Not at all. I still think about it sometimes. About that moment when I heard the breath on the other side of the door. About the tracks that never led away. About the feeling that something had been watching me the entire night. Because the truth is, whatever it was never left footprints going back into the woods. And part of me still wonders if maybe, just maybe, it never left at all. I started working for the county's water and sanitation department about 8 years ago. My job was pretty straightforward. Maintenance checks, filter changes, meter readings, all that. Most of the sites were small treatment stations scattered around the outer districts. Some were near residential areas, but others sat miles from the nearest paved road, half-forgotten places that still needed upkeep. One of those was Site 17. It wasn't the farthest or the oldest, but it always gave me a strange feeling. Nothing supernatural, just something off. It was tucked in a low valley near an old rail line that hadn't been used in decades. The road to it was narrow, partly gravel, and often washed out. No homes nearby. No phone signal. There wasn't even much wildlife around. I was assigned to visit Site 17 once every 2 months. Usually it was a routine stop. Inspect the tanks, run the test equipment, make sure the generators were working, log the readings, and move on. Most guys hated going out there. It was always muddy, there were too many wasps in summer, and it got deathly quiet. The kind of quiet that made you constantly glance over your shoulder, even though you knew no one was there. That October, I got scheduled for Site 17 again. Normally I would have tried to swap it, but our team was stretched thin. I loaded up the truck early in the morning and headed out with the usual tools, the water testing kit, and a gas can for the backup generator. It had rained the night before, and the dirt road was slick and uneven. The truck fishtailed a bit as I drove up the incline before descending into the valley where the plant sat. It was barely more than a concrete blockhouse surrounded by a chain-link fence. A couple of big tanks sat to the left of the structure, and a rusted utility shed leaned against the backside. I parked by the gate, unlocked it, and drove in slowly, splashing through shallow puddles. The place looked the same as always. No damage, no signs of anyone else being there. I cut the engine, got out, and immediately noticed how damp the air was. Everything smelled like wet leaves and mildew. I started with the basics. Checked the intake pumps, normal. Filters had some buildup, but nothing urgent. The generator had enough fuel from the last refill, though I topped it off anyway. I took water samples from 3 points in the system, labeled them, and stuck them in the cooler in the truck bed. Everything was going smoothly until I went to inspect the holding tanks. The tanks were cylindrical and stood maybe 10 feet high. Usually, I just had to check the pressure valves and read the meter on each one. But one of the meters showed an odd reading. Pressure was low, which usually meant a leak or blockage. I walked around the tank and found a patch of wet soil on the far side, which wasn't normal. I squatted down and saw that the ground near the base was darker than the surrounding mud. No flowing water, but it was definitely damp in a focused way. I tapped the tank with my wrench. It rang back solid. Then I noticed something else, a faint humming sound. Not mechanical, more like a low, vibrating tone, just on the edge of hearing. I stood there for a second, trying to figure it out. It was too low for a generator, and the pumps weren't running at the moment. I put my hand on the tank. It wasn't vibrating. The sound wasn't coming from inside it. I stood there for a few more seconds, feeling oddly unsettled. Then I realized something. I could hear the humming louder through my left ear than my right. I turned my head slowly. The sound seemed to be coming from beyond the trees on the other side of the chain-link fence, beyond the brush that led up the hill toward the old railroad line. I stood there listening, trying to make sense of it, but it slowly faded away after about 20 seconds. Just stopped. I shook it off, telling myself it was probably an animal, or maybe some weird echo. I went back to the utility room to check the electrical panel. Inside the blockhouse was cold and musty, with concrete floors that were always damp. I flicked on the lights, bare fluorescence overhead that buzzed a little too loud. The panel looked normal. No trip breakers. I logged the readings and was about to step out when I heard something from outside. It was a single, heavy thud. Not like something falling, more like something landing. It came from the direction of the tanks. I stepped out slowly and looked around. The sky was overcast now, darker than it had been earlier. The air felt still, heavier. There was nothing by the tanks. No movement. No animals. I walked over and looked behind them again. The patch of wet soil was unchanged. I tapped the tank again. Still solid. Then I noticed the door to the utility shed was open. I was sure I had closed it earlier. I remember the loud creak it made when I first went in to grab a wrench. I walked toward the shed, squinting as I approached. The inside was dark, and the bulb in there hadn't worked in months. I stepped up to the doorway and paused. The air inside was colder than outside. Not just a little, it felt like stepping in front of a freezer. I leaned in. Couldn't see much. Just silhouettes of old tools hanging on the wall, a couple of empty plastic bins, coils of hose on the floor. I stepped in. Immediately I regretted it. The smell was sharp, acidic, like ammonia mixed with rotting leaves. I turned to leave and caught something in the corner of my eye. There were boot prints. Fresh ones. They started near the doorway and led toward the back wall, but there was no one there. I backed out slowly, heart pounding. I looked around the site again, nothing. No people, no movement, just wet trees and fog rolling in low along the tree line. The boot prints weren't mine. The treads didn't match. I told myself it was probably one of the other techs. Maybe someone had been here the day before and left the door ajar. Maybe they forgot to log it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I decided to cut the visit short. I'd log what I had, send a note to the office, and come back later in the week with someone else. As I got in the truck, I noticed the driver's side mirror was tilted upward. I hadn't bumped it. I hadn't adjusted it. It was aimed skyward like someone had pushed it while standing beside the truck. I reached out and adjusted it back. My hand was shaking slightly. The engine started fine, but as I backed up, the truck dipped into a rut I hadn't seen coming in. The front tire sank deeper than expected, and I had to rock it a bit to get free. As I was doing that, I caught sight of something on the ridge above, near the tree line. A person, just standing there, too far to make out features. Wearing dark clothes, maybe a hood. Not moving, just watching. I blinked, and they were gone. Not like they ran, just not there anymore. I sat in the truck for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then I put it in gear and slowly made my way back up the road, glancing in the rearview mirror every few seconds. By the time I got back to the paved road, it was already late afternoon. I stopped at the first gas station with cell signal and called my supervisor. Told him I had done most of the checks, but left early due to bad weather. I didn't mention the boot prints, or the mirror, or the figure. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the shed, that freezing air, and the boot prints leading nowhere. The next morning, I got a call. Another guy had been sent out to double-check the readings, since mine were incomplete. He found the utility shed door open again, and this time, the inside had been trashed. Tools scattered, bins overturned. No signs of animals. Nothing taken. No tracks leading in or out. He also found a small digital recorder on the floor. One of those cheap voice memo devices. No one on our crew used those. When they played it, it was just static, until the end, when a deep, warbling voice said a single word. Stay. After that, the department locked Site 17 and put it on a temporary hold. A month later, they decided to decommission it completely. I never went back. They reassigned me to stations closer to town. I still drive by the turnoff road sometimes. The gate's chained now, and the brush has started creeping back in. But every time I pass it, I still hear that low hum in my ears. And sometimes late at night, when everything is quiet and I'm trying to fall asleep, I see that figure in my head, standing still on the ridge, just watching. I don't know why I thought it would be a good idea to take that route back home. Maybe it was because I wanted to save time. Maybe I was just tired of being stuck in traffic every time I came back from my sister's place. Either way, I left the main highway and took the old service road that ran along the base of the hills. I hadn't been on that road in years. It used to be paved, but now it was cracked and uneven, eaten up by weeds and time. It cut through some very quiet country, and I figured I could handle an hour of rough road if it meant skipping the evening congestion. At first, the road felt peaceful. Trees leaned over the sides like they were shielding the ground from the sky. There were no cars, no buildings, just fences, rolling grass fields, and the occasional rusted-out gate that hadn't been opened in years. I drove with one hand on the wheel, the other on my thigh, just relaxing into the rhythm of the bumps and dips. I passed a dried-out creek bed, then a crumbling barn with no roof. I didn't see a single person, but the sun was dipping fast. I noticed it when the shadows got long and sharp across the road, like someone had stretched the trees out. I checked the time, 6:48 p.m. Still early, but in the countryside, darkness comes fast. I turned on my headlights just in case. I was about halfway through the stretch when the road narrowed suddenly, squeezed by a rock face on one side and a barbed wire fence on the other. The pavement ended, replaced by gravel. It wasn't on the GPS, but I kept going. I figured the gravel section would only last a mile or two. Then I saw something odd. A red pickup truck, parked on the shoulder just ahead. Old model. No plates. The back was empty. It wasn't blocking the road, but it stood out like a tooth in a mouth full of gums. I slowed a little as I passed, glancing at the cab. No one was inside. The windows were rolled up, and the glass had that haze to it, like no one had touched it in months. I kept going. A few minutes later, I spotted a black trash bag off the side of the road, half buried in the grass. It was ripped open. I could see a boot sticking out. Not just any boot, a work boot, cracked and covered in dried mud. Looked like it had been there a while. I stared at it a little too long as I passed, and my tires dipped hard into a rut. My steering wheel jerked, and I felt the jolt through my whole spine. I stopped the car to check if I'd blown a tire. All 4 tires were fine. No hissing, no bulges. But when I stood there, next to the car, something felt wrong. The air was too still. Not even the sound of wind. I looked around. The trees didn't move. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just silence. I got back in and locked the doors. I was starting to regret the shortcut. The road kept getting worse. The gravel turned to dirt, and it was packed down in places and soft in others. My tires slipped a couple times, and I had to slow to a crawl. I passed more weird things. An old bicycle, half buried in a ditch. A deer carcass that had been picked clean, just bones and a hide like paper. A set of tire tracks that came out of the woods, crossed the road, and disappeared into the trees on the other side. Then I saw the shack. It wasn't even a real house, just a single-room wooden structure with no windows. The door was open, hanging crooked off one hinge. No lights, no sign of life. Just there, sitting about 30 feet off the road. I don't know what possessed me to stop again, but I did. Maybe I just wanted to understand who used this road, who lived out here, if anyone. I stepped out again, left the engine running. The sun had dipped below the hills now. The trees were throwing shadows like black ink across the road. I walked to the shack. There was a smell, like old oil and wet metal. I got to the doorway and peered inside. Empty mostly. A broken chair in the corner. A dirty blanket on the floor. A tin can with dried beans stuck to the bottom. The wall opposite the door had scratch marks, long, deep scratches that tore through the wood like claws or knives. They weren't random. They looked deliberate. Almost like someone had been marking days, but not neatly. Like they were done in panic, over and over. I backed away. I turned back to my car and felt something shift in the air. Like pressure. Like the kind of pressure you get before a storm hits. But there wasn't a cloud in the sky. My stomach twisted. I walked faster, then jogged. When I reached my car, I saw something that made my chest go cold. The driver's side door was open. I hadn't left it open. I was sure of that. I always lock my door, especially when I'm out of the car on a deserted road. I froze. I looked inside. No one there. Nothing seemed touched. My phone was still in the cup holder. Wallet on the seat. Keys in the ignition. Engine still running. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had just been inside. The air inside the cab felt warm, like it had been breathed in. I looked around the road, the trees, the shack. Nothing. I got in and locked all 4 doors. I pulled back onto the road faster than I should have, kicking up dust. My hands were slick on the wheel. For a while, I didn't see anything else. Just more trees, more road, more dark. I kept my eyes forward, only glancing in the rearview mirror now and then. I didn't want to look into the woods again. I just wanted to be out. Then, about 10 minutes later, I saw a man walking along the side of the road. He was walking away from me, in the same direction I was going. Just a figure at first, gray jacket, long legs. As I got closer, I slowed down. I figured he might need help, but something in me screamed not to stop. I couldn't explain it. I just didn't want to be near him. So I drove around him, gave him a wide berth. I didn't look at his face, but in the mirror, I saw him turn around. He stopped walking and just stood there in the middle of the road, watching me drive away. I hit the gas. I didn't stop again until I reached the main road. When I finally got back to familiar ground, I pulled over at a gas station. Bright lights, people, safety. I sat there for a long time, engine off, hands still on the wheel. That road isn't on the GPS anymore. I checked later. It shows up as a thin gray line with no name. Google says it's closed off past a certain point. Says it's overgrown, inaccessible. But I drove it. I never should have. The next morning, I went out to my car. I was going to take it to a mechanic, just to get it looked over. I didn't trust it anymore. When I opened the door, I found something on the passenger seat. It was a boot, the same kind I saw in the trash bag, covered in dried mud. I didn't touch it. I slammed the door shut and called the police. They came and took it, asked a lot of questions. I answered what I could. They called me 2 days later. The boot matched a missing persons report from 5 years ago. A man who disappeared while driving through that area. Never found. Now I take the highway every time, even if traffic's bad, even if it adds an hour. Because whatever is out there, it doesn't want to be found. But it doesn't like being seen either. I didn't plan on getting stuck out there. Not for that long. I only meant to stay the weekend. My friend Ben had a cabin out in the woods, just past the state line and far enough from the nearest gas station that cell signal barely clung to life. He told me the place needed a little cleanup, some leaves blown off the porch, trash taken to the burn barrel, pipes checked, and so on. Ben had some family emergency and asked me if I could go instead. I owed him for something, and I had some time off work, so I said yes. The drive took me almost 4 hours. First on the highway, then down narrower roads that turned to cracked pavement, then to gravel, then just dirt. By the time I pulled up, I could see why Ben said it needed care. The grass was high and patchy, weeds crawling up the porch supports, and the old wood siding had dark streaks where rain had bled dirt from the roof down the walls. It was a single-story cabin with a shed off to the right. A big fire pit sat in front of it, circled by crooked logs for seats. The woods around it were thick, barely any space between the trunks, and shadows settled early. I parked, stretched my legs, and checked my phone. 1 bar. That would be the last time I saw any signal until I got back to town. The first couple of hours were easy. I swept out the porch, checked the interior. The place smelled stale but clean enough. Mice had chewed a few holes through the back closet, but nothing too bad. I made a mental note to seal it later. I unpacked the few groceries I brought into the old fridge. It still worked, buzzing a little loud, but the milk stayed cold. That night, I made a small fire outside. It was chilly for spring, so I kept my jacket on. There wasn't much sound out there. No birds, no rustling wind. Just the fire cracking, and once in a while, a faint thump in the woods that I told myself was a deer or a branch falling. I turned in early. The bed in the cabin was stiff and narrow. I lay awake longer than I expected, staring at the ceiling. There was this strange feeling I couldn't shake, like the woods were watching. Not a presence exactly, just an awareness. Too quiet. I must have fallen asleep around midnight. The second day started fine. I got up early and walked to the stream about half a mile behind the cabin. There was a path, though it was overgrown. I carried a bucket and rinsed out some tools Ben had left in the shed. I liked how quiet it was at first. No cars, no people. It felt peaceful. I walked the edge of the woods for a bit after lunch, just exploring. I didn't go far, but I remember stopping at one point and looking back. The trees looked thicker behind me than they had when I came in, like they moved somehow. Probably just my imagination. Light can play tricks like that. When I got back, I noticed something off. A chair that had been tucked under the porch was now sitting out in the grass near the fire pit. I stared at it for a few seconds. I couldn't remember moving it. I walked over, looked at it, picked it up, and carried it back. I told myself I must have moved it and forgot. Maybe I was losing track of time. That night, I had a harder time falling asleep. Around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly. No sound, just a feeling, deep in my stomach, like something was wrong. I sat up in bed and listened. Nothing, not even crickets. I lay back down but didn't sleep much. The next morning, I noticed fresh marks on the ground near the porch. 2 parallel lines, about 6 feet long, like something heavy had been dragged through the dirt. It started near the fire pit and ended just under the porch edge. I crouched down to look at it, but couldn't tell what made it. There were no footprints around it, no tire marks. Just 2 grooves. I walked the area, checked the shed, the back path to the stream. Everything seemed untouched. I was starting to get uneasy. I chalked it up to animals. Maybe a bear dragging something, or raccoons. Still, it didn't feel right. I tried calling Ben, but there was no signal. I held my phone up, walked in circles. Nothing. I considered packing up and heading out early, but something about leaving without a real reason felt dumb. I told myself to man up and stay the last night. That evening, I locked the door. I don't mean I just latched it. I slid the bolt, wedged a chair under the knob, and kept my flashlight and pocket knife on the nightstand. It felt paranoid, but I couldn't ignore the feeling in my gut, like something was just off. Not dangerous, just not right. I didn't sleep much that night either. Around 3 a.m., I heard movement. Not inside, just outside the wall, past the headboard. It was soft, a shuffle, then a faint scratching sound. Not like claws, more like fingers dragging slowly across wood. It stopped, started again. I didn't move. I just lay still, heart pounding. It went on for maybe 10 minutes. Then silence. When morning came, I stepped outside with a hammer in my belt and my phone in my hand. There were marks on the wall, right where my head had been while I slept. Long, narrow scratches. Vertical. Too high up for an animal unless it stood upright. My stomach dropped. I packed my bag. I didn't care that I promised Ben a full weekend. I tossed everything in the car, turned the engine, and started back down the dirt road. It was slow going, potholes everywhere. I drove for maybe a mile, then hit something. The front tires slammed into a shallow ditch that hadn't been there on the way in. It looked like the ground had been dug up and shifted. Maybe rain washed it out, maybe something else. I tried backing out, but the tires spun. I was stuck. I climbed out and looked around. The road was narrow, woods on both sides. No sign of other cars, no houses. I popped the trunk, pulled out the folding shovel, and started digging around the tires. It was hot, and I was sweating like hell within minutes. I got one side clear and tried again. Nothing. The tires spun and threw dirt. I almost screamed. Then I heard something. A crack in the woods, maybe 30 feet off. I stopped. Listened. Another crack. Then silence. I backed up toward the car. Stared into the trees. I couldn't see anything, but the hairs on my neck stood straight up. I got in the car and locked the doors. For the next hour, I just sat there, watching the woods. I didn't eat, didn't drink, just sat in the heat waiting. The sound didn't come back. Around noon, I got out again. Dug more, cleared space under both tires. Eventually, with a lot of rocking and spinning, I got the car free. I peeled out and didn't stop until I hit the main road again. I didn't look back. I drove straight home. When I got signal again, my phone exploded with missed calls and texts from Ben. I called him and told him the place was done. I didn't explain. He didn't ask. A few weeks later, he told me something weird. He went back up himself to check on things. The shed door was wide open, tools scattered. One of the porch supports had been clawed halfway through. He thought it was a bear. I didn't argue. But here's the thing. A few nights after I got back, I had a dream. It wasn't like normal dreams. It felt real. I was back in the cabin, lying in bed, and something was at the window. Not knocking, just watching. And then it walked away. That's all. Just walked. I haven't been back to the woods since. I don't camp. I don't hike. Sometimes I still wake up at 3 a.m. for no reason. I just lie there, listening. But I never hear anything. Still, I know what I felt. Something was out there. And it wasn't an animal. It wasn't a ghost either. It was real. And it knew exactly where I was sleeping. It was late September when I took the trip out to the hills alone. Not a vacation, really. I just needed a break. Work had piled up, my head felt packed with static, and I hadn't slept properly in weeks. So I picked a place off a hiking forum that promised seclusion, a small valley off a logging road in northern Washington, surrounded by thick forest and no cell service for miles. The pictures showed a clearing near a stream and a makeshift fire pit left by someone who'd been there before. It looked quiet, peaceful. I packed my old backpack with the essentials: tent, sleeping bag, some freeze-dried meals, a camping stove, and a couple of tools just in case. I threw in a little hatchet I barely used anymore, and my knife, the one my dad gave me when I was a teenager. I brought a book too, but I didn't expect to read much. Mostly I just wanted to sit, breathe, and be where no one could reach me. The drive out was longer than I'd thought. The GPS cut out about 30 minutes before I reached the trailhead. After that, I followed a series of notes I'd written down. Turn left at the old ranger sign. Keep right at the fork near the burnt stump. The road was rough, just gravel and dirt, barely wide enough for my truck. I passed one other vehicle, an old Subaru parked crooked near a ditch, but no one was in it. I reached the pull-off near noon. From there, I hiked about a mile downhill into the valley, cutting through thick trees and fallen logs. The air felt cleaner than I'd remembered air could feel. I set up my tent near the edge of the stream, facing away from the slope, with a narrow view of the water and the rising forest beyond. It was perfect. By the time the sun began to sink behind the trees, I'd eaten and built a small fire. I sat next to it on a log, listening to the crackling and the rushing of the stream. That first night, I slept better than I had in months. No trucks rumbling past, no glowing notifications in my face. Just silence and darkness, and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. The second day, I hiked up the ridge to get a better view of the valley. The climb was rough in spots, but the view from the top made it worth it. Miles of trees in every direction. I didn't see any animals, but I noticed a few broken branches and some scat that looked fresh. Probably deer or elk. Nothing unusual. When I got back to camp that evening, I noticed something weird. One of my food bags had been moved. Not torn or opened, just shifted, like it had been picked up and set back down a few feet away from where I left it. I figured it was my mistake. Maybe I'd forgotten exactly where I put it. Still, I made sure everything was zipped up tight and stored properly before I went to sleep that night. But something felt off. I kept waking up. Not because of any noise, really. Just that uneasy feeling you get when you think someone's watching you. I even sat up once, unzipped the tent, and looked around with my flashlight. Nothing. Just trees and darkness. The fire had long gone out. I forced myself back to sleep. The next morning, there were tracks. Not boot prints. Not paws either. They were barefoot. Human. And they circled my camp. The prints were faint but clear enough in the soft soil. I counted at least 4 different places where they looped around. Near the fire pit, by the stream, behind the tent. They were small, too. Not like a grown man's foot. More like a teenager's. I stood there for a long time, just staring at them. Then I packed up everything loose and stuffed it into the tent. I kept the hatchet on my belt the rest of the day. I didn't leave camp. By evening, I convinced myself it had to be another hiker. Maybe someone wandered through and didn't mean any harm. Maybe they didn't want to wake me up. Still, I set up a line of small branches and twigs around the camp that night. Just enough that I'd hear a crunch if anyone walked through. Around midnight, I heard it. Snap. Then another. Closer. I stayed still in my sleeping bag, my ears straining in the dark. I kept the knife in one hand, the hatchet in the other, and I listened. The sound stopped after a while, replaced by what I swear was breathing. Not heavy, not loud, just slow, quiet breathing, maybe 10 feet from the tent. Then silence. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Just laid there with my eyes open, staring at the curve of the tent above me. When the first light came through, I unzipped the tent and looked outside. Nothing. But all the twigs and branches I'd placed around the camp were gone. Not broken gone. I didn't bother eating breakfast. I shoved everything into my pack, broke down the tent, and started back up the trail. The woods felt thicker than before, like they were pressing in on all sides. Every snapping twig made me jump. I didn't stop until I reached the truck. The whole drive back down the mountain, I kept checking the rearview mirror. Once, just once, I saw something move along the side of the road. A shape between the trees. Not an animal. Not a person. Just something there, and then not. I didn't tell anyone about it for a while. Months passed. I went back to work, pretended everything was fine. But it stuck with me. The breathing, the prints, the fact that someone had been out there in the middle of nowhere, barefoot, and quiet enough to move through my camp without waking me up. I went online, tried to find reports of other people seeing the same thing. Found a few posts about weird things in the woods, mostly stories that felt too dramatic or made up. But one caught my eye. It was short, just a paragraph. A guy describing how, years ago, he'd camped near a stream in a valley off a logging road, and woke up to find his gear moved around and bare footprints circling his tent. He left the next day. Said he never went back. No one had replied to the post. I checked the timestamp. It was 6 years old. Same area. That's when I decided I wasn't crazy. I've camped since then, but never in the same kind of place. I stick to state parks now. Campgrounds with rangers and other people nearby. Places with cell service. I miss the silence sometimes. That deep, complete silence you only find in wild places. But I'll never go that deep again. Because whatever was out there wasn't trying to scare me. It was trying to learn me. The way it circled. The way it took the branches without making a sound. The way it breathed, just loud enough for me to know it was there. It wasn't just passing through. It was watching, and it wanted me to know. I woke up suddenly, the pounding in my chest echoing in the near-total darkness of my small apartment. I lay still for a moment, listening. The silence around me felt thick, heavy. I could hear my own breathing, shallow but steady. I closed my eyes again and tried to calm myself, but the knot in my stomach only tightened. A few minutes passed in stillness. Then I heard it again, a faint crunching sound coming from the hallway, like someone stepping on dry leaves or broken glass. I froze. My heart felt like it might burst through my ribs. I hadn't locked the door before bed. I never did. I always felt safe here, in my own space. But now that feeling felt fragile, like paper in a storm. The crunch came again, closer this time. I could hear tiny shuffling footsteps. I lay on my back, every muscle tensed, waiting for what would happen next. My mind raced. Someone could be in the building. Maybe drunk, maybe lost. But I don't carry knives. I don't even have anything sharp except the kitchen knife. My hands shook at the thought. The footsteps stopped just outside my door. I strained to listen. There was a soft click, almost inaudible, as though a key turning. My brain screamed. The door handle jigged. I felt raw panic. I stayed flat and silent. The rustling and faint scraping of shoe on wood came through the door. He didn't push in. Maybe he couldn't. I lay there for who knows how long. I couldn't breathe properly. I didn't dare move. Eventually footsteps shuffled off down the hall. Teeth chattering crunch, crunch, crunch fade into distant hush. When I dared to move, I slid out of bed with shaking limbs. I pulled on clothes I left on the floor and checked the lock. Somehow it was locked. I locked it again, shaking. Then I moved through the apartment, checking windows and doors. All secure. Nothing else seemed out of place. I found my phone and called the front office. No one answered. I called the emergency number. I left a message. I spent the rest of the night in the living room, lamp on, breathing into a pillow when I felt the fear too sharp. Dawn finally came. I saw sunlight through blinds, and I felt some calm return. I walked carefully out, down the hallway, to the front office. Someone was waiting, sleep in eyes. I told them everything. They said they'd check building cameras. They escorted me back inside. They reviewed the footage. They found a figure that entered the hallway around midnight, wearing a dark hoodie. He tried several doors. When mine remained locked, he moved on. He left around 12:30. They didn't recognize him as a resident. They called local security and increased patrols. I spent the day nervous, but safe inside. Weeks passed. No further incidents. I started sleeping normally again, though I still locked the door carefully. I installed a security camera at my entrance. I installed a motion sensor light in the hallway near my door. I felt safer. I began to rebuild my peace of mind. One afternoon, I got a call from the building manager. He told me they'd identified the intruder. It turned out to be a delivery person working for a third-party courier company. He had tried doors to see if units were open, looking for a place to leave packages. He hadn't meant harm, just someone lazy or careless. It wasn't the answer I expected, but it explained it. He was banned from the building. I felt relief wash through me at that. It was no prowler with evil intent, just someone sloppy. It didn't excuse it, but it meant I wasn't the target. I felt safe again. By the end, I learned. Fear can grip easily when boundaries feel broken. But I also learned to take action: locks, cameras, motion lights, simple measures that bring real peace. I still smell the sharp edge of anxiety when night comes. But now I breathe differently. I move differently. It ended good and clear. I'm safe. The person who entered is gone and banned. I have locks. I have cameras. I talked it through with the manager. I sleep in peace again. I know now that most threats aren't monsters under the bed. They're messy humans making thoughtless mistakes. And when I saw what happened, I felt relief and gratitude. I rebuilt security in my home and my mind. Fear no longer has the same power. It was near the end of my junior year in high school, one of those warm spring weeks where everything starts to feel less serious. Tests were wrapping up, classes felt more like passing time than learning, and people were already talking about summer plans. That was around the same time when a strange kind of trend had taken hold in our group, hunting down haunted places and sneaking in to explore them. I wouldn't say we were the bravest bunch, but there was a kind of peer pressure that came with being part of it. None of us wanted to be the one to back down. Every weekend, sometimes even on school nights, if someone had a car and others were free, we'd head out to whatever supposedly haunted spot someone had found. Most were the usual suspects: abandoned barns, creepy cemeteries, broken down shacks deep in the woods. Nothing ever really happened, and the scarier the story was ahead of time, the more of a joke it usually turned out to be once we got there. Still, there was something about being somewhere you weren't supposed to be, especially at night, that made it feel more exciting than it probably should have. The way it started was that one day after school, I was telling an older friend about our latest misadventure, an old church we'd found out past Route 9 that turned out to be mostly just raccoons and rotted floorboards. He laughed and said we were amateurs. He told me back when he was younger, he and his friends used to do the same thing, only they had guts. He said one of the places they went was a small house on a farm near where he grew up. I could tell the way he said it, there was something more to it. According to him, the farm had belonged to a man who was either a pastor or priest. No one was quite sure. He lived alone, deeply religious, apparently very intense about it. Over time, rumors built up that the man had gone mad. Eventually, he was arrested for murder, though my friend didn't have many details about the case. The guy died in prison, and the property was left to decay. A few years after that, my friend and his buddies decided to check out the house. It was already abandoned and run down by then. He said the windows were smashed, the door was hanging off its hinges, and everything was overgrown. What stuck with me, though, was the part where he said he went upstairs and found a coffin. Not just a box or an old trunk that could be mistaken for one, a real wooden coffin, plain but unmistakable, sitting in the middle of the room like someone had been preparing to use it. He said it took him a second to realize what it was, and when it hit him, he didn't even shout for his friends. He just turned around and ran. They all followed, and no one went back. The way he told the story was simple, but it got under my skin. I wasn't sure I believed it completely, but I didn't think he was lying either. He didn't seem like the kind of guy to make up stories just to scare kids. Later that week, I mentioned it to one of the guys in our group, someone who was always up for a challenge. We decided to check it out ourselves before telling the rest of the group. The plan was to find out if the house even existed, and if it did, then we'd bring the whole crew out for a real adventure. I knew roughly where my friend had grown up, so we drove out there after football practice one day. The neighborhood was like any other in the suburbs: cookie-cutter houses, trimmed lawns, quiet streets. Nothing strange or spooky about it. But behind the row of houses on that street, there was a large open field, covered in tall grass and weeds. Beyond that, the land sloped downward, and in the distance we could see the faint outline of trees, a fence line, and what looked like the edge of a barn or maybe a shed. We parked a few blocks away so we wouldn't look suspicious and walked through a side yard. Climbing over the chain-link fence wasn't hard, but the thick brush right after it made it clear no one had been back here in a long time. Vines wrapped around dead trees, the grass came up to our knees, and insects swarmed around us the deeper we went. We walked for about 10 minutes before the house came into view. It looked exactly how you'd picture a haunted house. 2 stories with chipped white paint, shutters barely hanging on, and a roof that sagged on one side. The windows were all broken or missing entirely. The front door was closed, but not properly. It leaned on its hinges like it wouldn't take much effort to knock it in. A single stone grave marker sat crookedly in the front yard, half swallowed by weeds. That was the part that made both of us hesitate. We got quiet. I remember the way the silence felt, like even the bugs had stopped for a second. There was a black bird on the roof, some kind of crow or raven, just watching. As soon as we got within 20 feet of the porch, the bird took off, not into the sky, but to a tree just beside the house. It landed and stayed there, like it still wanted to keep an eye on us. It wasn't enough to stop us, but it was just strange. The front door was jammed, swollen in the frame from years of rain and no upkeep. But one of the front windows was wide open. The glass had been completely removed, not just broken, as if someone had carefully taken the pane out and set it aside, though we didn't see it anywhere. We did rock, paper, scissors to see who would go in first. I lost, of course, but we were both nervous and climbed through within seconds of each other. The inside of the house was stuck in time. Dust was thick on every surface, but nothing had been ransacked or destroyed. There were picture frames still hanging on the walls, black and white portraits, some of children, others of couples I didn't recognize. In the living room, there was a small couch with floral patterns, still intact, and a wooden rocking chair that looked like it would fall apart if you breathed on it too hard. There were decorations on the shelves, a small cross, some ceramic animals, books that had gone soggy with time. It was strange, almost like someone had left in a hurry and never came back. We stayed close to each other at first, moving slowly and taking everything in. Every creak of the old wooden floorboards made us pause. After a while, we got a little more comfortable. Nothing had jumped out at us. The air smelled old and damp, but there was no sign of anything dangerous. We checked out the dining room, a long table, still set with cracked plates and rusted silverware. The kitchen was dusty but untouched. I even remember a glass sitting on the counter, with a dried-up ring at the bottom like someone had left it there and never came back. Neither of us really wanted to go upstairs, but that was where the original story had pointed. I tried to act calm, but my heart was beating heavy. The staircase looked solid enough, but the banister was broken and twisted near the top. The walls going up were covered in dark, water-stained wallpaper, peeling away at the corners. We moved slowly, one step at a time, making sure each stair would hold. When we reached the second floor, it was just one large room. The walls were bare up there, and the floor was mostly empty, except for some rotting boxes and what looked like a busted dresser. There was no coffin, no furniture besides a few broken pieces. We stood there for a minute, feeling kind of foolish. That was it. This was the place. We laughed a little, maybe more from relief than humor. All the nerves we'd built up started to fade. We talked about how we'd bring the rest of the group out here that weekend, maybe even plan a night trip for extra drama. It all seemed harmless again. Back downstairs, we wandered a bit more freely, exploring each room with less hesitation. That's when I noticed something strange in the kitchen. Near the floor, between the cabinets and the back wall, was a small door. It was maybe 2 feet high, with a rusted latch and flaking paint. I don't know why it caught my attention, but something about it felt out of place. I crouched and unlatched it. The door opened easily, revealing a dark stone stairwell. It was narrow, maybe 3 feet wide, and steep. The stairs went down into total blackness, but I could see a landing about halfway, where the stairs turned and kept going. The whole thing was made of old stone bricks, slick with dampness and covered in cobwebs. Sitting on that landing, just barely visible in the dim light from the kitchen, was a large, rectangular wooden box. It wasn't some fancy, polished thing. It looked hand-built. Rough, unfinished wood, slightly warped from moisture, with rusted hinges and a thick, heavy lid. But even from that angle, even in the shadows, we both knew exactly what it was. A coffin, the kind you bury someone in. Not a joke, not a prop, not a misidentified trunk or old chest. A real, unmistakable coffin, just sitting in a basement no one had mentioned, no one had touched. There was a moment where neither of us moved. No words, just staring at it. I felt like the floor tilted under me, like something in my brain couldn't quite process what I was seeing. It wasn't fear exactly, not yet. It was something deeper, more instinctive. Like every part of my body had suddenly agreed we were in the wrong place at the wrong time. We didn't even speak. It was like our bodies decided before our brains did. We turned and scrambled for the window. Not the door, the window. We both tried to get through it at the same time, getting stuck halfway, and nearly falling on top of each other in the process. Once we hit the porch, we didn't look back. We just ran. The weeds were thicker now. It felt like the field was trying to hold us back. Our legs scraped against thorns, and I remember tripping once, going down hard and slamming my elbow into a rock, but I didn't stop. We didn't say anything, just ran full speed until we got near the fence line again. Only then, when we turned to look back, did we see the bird again. That same massive black bird from earlier. It was flying from the tree back to the roof, gliding without a sound and landing right back where it had started, perched and watching. We didn't stop to think about it. We just vaulted the fence, sprinted through the backyard we'd crossed earlier, and got back to the car without saying a word. We sat there, panting, soaked in sweat, scratched up from head to toe, still not saying anything. It was only later,